Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. We'd like to welcome you all to the January 7th monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. The open meeting law requires that we notify each of you that a recording of this meeting is being made by Commission staff, and this meeting is now called to order. My name is Linda Eastley, co-chair of the BCDC, and I'd like to thank all the commissioners for their professional guidance that helps shape our city of Boston into a more beautiful, sustainable, and equitable city for all of its citizens. For those of us joining us for the first time, the top of 2025, this commission meets 2 to 3 times each month to review projects that are being proposed in the city of Boston and that are over 100,000 square feet or have other public realm significance. Tonight we have 4 projects on our agenda. 2 are here for recommendations and 2 are new to us. And also at the end of the meeting, commissioners will also have an informational presentation from the city staff about office to resi conversion. So we will start with a roll call, and commissioners, if you could just say present as I call your name. Amy Chambers. I don't know if she's joined us just yet. Jonathan Evans.
Present.
Diana Fernandez.
Present.
David Hassan. I didn't see his face pop up just yet. Mick Young Kim.
Present.
Kathy Kotarides. I think she might be joining us in a little bit. Mimi Love.
Present.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Present.
David Manfredi.
Present.
Catherine Morris. She might join us in a bit. Bill Ron.
Present.
Laura Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Linda Eastley, present. We do not have meeting minutes to approve tonight, commissioners, but we will cover those during our February meeting, so we don't need to take a vote on those. And that leads us, Christina, to a report from Review Committee. We've got 2 new projects, which are North Station Gateway Project at 250 Causeway Street and also 181 West First Street.
Thank you, Commissioner Eastley. And good evening, Commissioners. Per the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, Planning Department staff have prepared the following recommendations for your consideration. A proposed project at 251 Causeway Street, West End, also known as the North Station Gateway Project, seeking Article 80B entitlement, contemplates the demolition of 3 existing structures totaling approximately 211,000 square feet and the development of approximately 560,000 square feet of primarily hotel and residential uses and 150 off-street parking spaces in a single building on an approximately 0.7 acre site. The proponent filed a project notification form on September 27th, and Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on November 21st, 2024. Planning Department staff recommend that the Commission vote to review the proposed project.
Thank you, Christina. Do we have any recusals on this project, the North Station Gateway Project? All right. So is there a motion to review?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Please answer aye if you are in favor. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
I don't know if David Hassan has joined us just yet. Mick Young Kim?
Aye.
Has Kathy joined us yet? Mimi Love?
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Aye.
David Manfredi?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
Laura Solano?
Aye.
Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley, aye. We will review. Christina, can you take us through 181 West First?
A proposed notice of project change to a proposed project at 181 West First Street, South Boston, reviewed by this commission and approved by the BPDA board in 2014, contemplates dimensional changes, including an increase in height from 3 and 4 stories to 4 and 6-story building, and a commensurate increase in gross floor area that would increase the number of dwelling units from 97 to 149. The proponent filed a notice of project change on September 19th, 2024. Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on October 29th, 2024, and recommend that the commission vote to review the proposed project.
Thanks, Christina. Do we have any recusals on this project, commissioners? All right, is there a motion to review?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
And if you could answer aye if you are in favor as well. Jonathan Evans,
Aye.
McYoung Kim,
Aye.
Mimi Love,
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Aye.
David Manfredi,
aye,
Bill Ron,
Aye.
Lara Solano,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes,
Aye.
and myself, Linda Eastley, aye. We will review and look forward to seeing both of those 2 new projects later on in the agenda. So we're going to kick off with 2 projects that are back in front of the full commission for final recommendation. The first project is 22 Drydock Avenue in the South Boston waterfront. And as a reminder, this is going to be the 4th presentation to BCDC from this proponent. Commissioners Haseen and Sykes are both recused from this project. So Kirk will say goodbye to you for, I think, this one and the next one, actually.
Correct.
And a reminder that the commissioners that were at the last subcommittee were Commissioners Evans, Love, Ron, Manfredi, and Solano. So if you can get your comments teed up for when the proponent finishes their presentation, we will let you go first with your comments. We also are going to have a quick summary by staff after we see this project to get an overview as well. So with that, I
Linda,
think- yes.
cameras on, cameras off, but remain on, correct?
If you can remain on, Kirk, that would be great. Cameras off and audio off.
Okay.
And we can send you a message when we're ready for you to come back in for the 2 new projects.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're ready, Christina, for Related Beal and the SGA team to bring up their presentation.
Great. Is there anyone from the proponent team that has not been promoted that needs to? You can raise your digital hand and we'll make sure you're promoted. Otherwise, you can feel free to share screen and begin, and we'll set a 10-minute timer.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year, Commissioners. My name is Chuck Poplato. I'm the Vice President of Global Operations and Real Estate for Vertex. I'm going to present just very briefly, given some of the time constraints, just a refresher on the project, given that we had reviewed this a month or so ago. So to recap, our proposal is to build a pedestrian bridge between 2 facilities. One is existing, which we refer to as Leiden Center 1. The second one is in construction today, Leiden Center 2, and you can see that depicted in the plan view in front of you now. Next slide, please, Joe. A little bit about the basis and the reasoning and the requirements for the bridge. So the bridge itself is really necessary to facilitate ongoing manufacturing operations, as well as research activities at our East Seaport location, Leiden Center 1, Leiden Center 2. Importantly, we recall we are manufacturing our newest cell-based therapy program there. These are living cells that we manufacture in one building, do QC testing, or we'll be doing QC testing in the second building. And so the thoroughfare between the buildings is truly a requirement to help facilitate this process in an efficient and timely manner, recognizing that this particular therapy has got a 72-hour shelf life. So from the time it completes its QC testing, we have to get it into the patient in 72 hours. So it's really the basis around the impetus of the bridge between the buildings. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick recap. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Mamayak with SGA, who will review the process that we have undergone both with the full committee and 2 meetings with the subcommittee. And Joe will now take the presentation from here. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to walk you through our presentation today. We had a
Joe, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Sure.
Sounds a bit like you're underwater.
Is this a little bit better?
A little bit.
Let me check with my phone.
Nope.
It's still a little faint.
How is this?
Yes,
Much better.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. Too
We
many
didn't want to
buttons.
miss anything.
Thank you. So I just want to review the process. The BCDC process, started with a full committee presentation in November the 12th. We have those comments that then rolled into a subcommittee review that started on November 26th. And what we heard was, come back to the team, in the conversation with the commissioners, more background with the location and why symmetry and asymmetry has been a discussion that we've been developing. Materiality, showing diverse options with that, transparency and the interplay between structure and the glass enclosure, and certainly complexity. We had a number of things that were going on and simply reducing the complexity to make a stronger design statement. So what I'm going to show you here is content that was developed for those conversations in a brief overview. Next, please. So in terms of location, the preferred location is in blue in the upper left-hand corner. We looked at a number of optional locations in here, and no doubt, there was, the location is a major factor for a number of reasons. We wanted to really relate to and respect the urban framework, and by moving closer to the edges or the intersection, certainly, we sort of challenged the overall massing and architectural statement. We don't want to do that. The next thing, the placement of the bridge, we want to have a structural alignment that makes sense. And certainly the synergies with the program and operational efficiencies were key. Next, please. In terms of materiality, we explored, a number of materials, colors, and hues. And textures for possibility with the application of the bridge. So we started with the light grays and silvers. We looked at the darker grays and charcoals. We even moved into, some of the bronze and the copper patinas for consideration. And some of these, just drew too much attention to the bridge itself. So we settled on, and we're just showing the examples down below, the exterior view and the interior view and such, that we have the lighter gray and the silvers in such a way that they become lighter in the way it's expressed and are complementary, no doubt, to the buildings in the vernacular of the Marine Industrial Park. The diagram in the upper right-hand corner was at that point, how we were considering the wrapper, how we were looking at all the surfaces, of the bridge itself, the glass and the underside, and how we would look at simplifying that pattern around that. Next, please. The form evolution was certainly critical, and the 9 diagrams in the upper right-hand corner captures a moment in time when we were looking at, clear spans. We were looking at support from below where that column might be, even vertical stays that were coming off of the new building supporting that. We're looking at symmetrical and asymmetrical solutions for that. We're looking at a wide range of possibilities at the very early stages. And then we looked at, the guidelines in which there was a clear statement that certainly we want to have no supports that would be seen. It's a clear span. We do not want to limit any of the visual corridors in and around the public realm and around these buildings. And certainly when we went from the asymmetrical, from the symmetrical to the asymmetrical, it allowed us to have a greater portion of the structural load coming off of the new building, LC2, allowing minimum interventions to the existing facade. Down below shows an evolution of just the container of the bridge itself as it became an asymmetrical element and how we have took into account the structural elements and worked with a narrative. Next, please.
From the proposal team that you a little bit over the halfway point of your allotted presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. In terms of the symmetry of the bridge, we're looking at that point, 50% of the load would be applied to both buildings, and this would require some structural interventions of the existing lab manufacturing building, and certainly we wanted to minimize that impact. Next one, please. In terms of going to the asymmetrical scheme, allowed to reflect, the composition of the buildings themselves in the context that it is working in. So there's a balance to the overall composition with the asymmetrical scheme, and a greater portion of the structural load could be assigned to the new building, to LC2 on the left-hand side. Last but not least is certainly this asymmetrical bridge allowed for a reduced impact to the roadway during construction because it could be supported curbside. Next one, please. Precedent. This is something we've showed before. The 6 images in the center were from the previous presentation. We have complemented it with flanking images on the far right-hand side and the far left-hand side. We also are sharing the nuances of these bridges themselves and what they mean and how we sort of looked at them. A asymmetrical bridge design becomes more elegant, in my opinion, if the following things are taken into consideration. When the structural expression itself is not primary, it's secondary, or it's supporting, the overall form. There's maximum transparency. The middle one is the most transparent. Our building, our bridge itself has 3 sides of glass, so it's maximum transparency. And the last item, which is really critical, is that there's a balance to the overall composition to the buildings that they are attaching and the urban space that it's working in. And so while it's not identical to what we have, the D, which is in the center, there's 2 images right in there, really captures the essence where the structure itself is subservient to the overall form, unlike its close cousin in the example on E, where that structure is coming to the surface and becomes primary. Next, please.
Still let the procurement team know you have 2 minutes left.
Okay. So what we heard for the second subcommittee was to look at the underside, really simplify that, look at the patterning of the bridge, look at the lighting, and look at a few additional views of the bridge at different sizes. Perspectives. So the previous view down on the left-hand side, very complex. Upper right-hand side, we've simplified. It's almost origami. The paper folds are very simple and straightforward, and we removed the triangulation that was in the previous scheme. Next, please. This is an evolution of the bridge itself. We essentially have removed step 4 in this process and relaxed to step 3, which is a stronger statement and something that we had, in a previous scheme. Next, please. Here's a diagram of that geometry and how it's really simplified. So we're looking at also the hierarchy of panel joints. That was also part of the discussion. Next, please. When looking at the bridge, we're also, considering its attachment and its reaction to the surfaces of the 2 bridges, looking at the horizontal and vertical datum points. Next, please. Also from the patterning, working from the right to the left, whereas the pattern is asymmetrical and densified. We've now removed the embossing that's on the underside of the bridge itself. We've relaxed the frit pattern to be a 1.5 to 2%, which helps in the performance of the glazing, but also is bird safe. Next, please. And looking at the lighting, this is something we're bringing forward with a little bit more clarity, looking at the light details and the effects. Again, it's a LED lighting that is very sophisticated. Here's a interior lighting scheme where there's no luminaires that are seen, either in the bridge itself or the public realm. You can see some of the technical lighting, the positioning of the lighting in such a way to give those accents on the outside as well as the inside of the bridge. Next, please.
May I ask the proponent team to please wrap up your presentation? Thank you.
And then a few final views, coming a little bit closer to the bridge itself, a little bit closer to the site, looking at it from the public space right in here, the main entry to the building. And then lastly, the simple form making, the selection of materials, the sophistication of the lighting scheme, and the balance of the overall position. The composition will allow the bridge to become an elegant gateway within the Marine Industrial Park. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Joe, for a really clear presentation taking us through your process. Seth, I think you or Christina are going to offer some summary comments before we jump into commissioner comments.
Yes, thank you, Linda. And Klaus, if you could stop sharing your screen and we'll share. For the commissioners, this is something new. We're beta testing tonight to see how it goes, providing a staff summary of the BCDC process for introduction and subcommission before your final deliberations here. So for 22 Drydock, the staff comments are that the project meets established guidelines for pedestrian bridges, which include a demonstrated and exceptional operational and programmatic need, that most bridges should be clear span with no structural elements in the public right-of-way. They should be located high above the street, limiting visual and physical impact on the public realm, maximizing transparency and minimizing visual weight, and providing a distinctive form that's related to the architectural character of the buildings it connects. We believe that the team is meaningfully engaged in studies on bridge location, design, approach, materiality, and lighting as requested, and that the location was verified through the study. The design approach reinforces the guidelines, in particular a focus on maximizing transparency and minimizing visual weight. The asymmetrical design approach is based on a structural logic to minimize supports in the public realm and minimizes the overall bridge profile. And the underside and the lighting of the bridge has been improved through the BCDC process. A focus for further refinements, we believe, include continued exploration of material expression, color, and lighting to reinforce the simplicity, elegance, warmth, texture, and relationship between the two buildings, and continued exploration of highlighting perhaps the diagonal structure and interior curtain wall framing to create a little bit more visual hierarchy and texture. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I turn it back to Linda.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks for that summary. So commissioners, time for our comments. And as a reminder, Commissioner Evans, Love, Ron, Manfredi, and Solano, we will start off with your comments. And I think, Christina, you also will be helping us to manage our time tonight during the commissioner comment period.
And if we can ask the proponent to bring up the presentation again, and then I'm realizing David Manfredi was not at the last subcommittee meeting.
Okay.
And Linda, if I can just note, my hand raising function isn't available, but I'm happy to go after Commissioner Ron.
I see you, Mimi. Thank you for waving wildly. All right, Bill.
Thank you. We had a lively meeting last week, and let me just say 2 or 3 things. I voted to return it to the full commission. I have still some issues with the asymmetry, which I'll discuss at the end. But let me say one thing. I personally am very supportive of having the BPDA be the determiner of whether it meets the medical related requirements of our policies. We as commissioners don't have well, some of you have the expertise, some of us don't. So that we should really leave to the BPDA. So it really leaves the issue of design quality as the one before us. And uh, given that the concerns about these bridges has lots to do with walking and pedestrian patterns in the city. There are urban design issues that are important, and there are some design issues themselves. And I will say we got a shortened version of the presentation today. So we had asked the petitioners to show us examples of asymmetrical bridges elsewhere in the world, and they did so. And I think all of us agreed that making an asymmetrical bridge work is actually a hard piece of work. And I will say I compliment the petitioners that with each session, including today, they've simplified it in many ways, and to me, it's more acceptable. That said, I think I still am worried about the precedent, because I think in looking at these other bridges elsewhere in the world, it is clear that a lot of the asymmetric bridges are done for purely design reasons and not technical reasons, and they bring an unnecessary complexity to a structure that, in all cases, we're trying to minimize their visual effect. And so as we vote today, I think we have to realize that this could open a deluge of asymmetrical bridges which do not have the necessary simplicity that is wrapped up in the design guidelines. I would add also there's I'll tease you, Seth, one of the design guidelines that you didn't list in your list is a strong preference for level bridges. And of course, the asymmetry here actually makes it look unlevel, even as it may not be. But so I just urge us to maybe even our vote, I don't know, to make it clear that increased complexity brought on by asymmetry is something we have to be very nervous about.
Bill, thanks for your comments. Mimi?
I'll start by saying that I've been at all of the meetings, the introductory meeting and the 2 subcommittee meetings, and we have really challenged the proponent team, and I really feel that they have been responsive. And I think tonight's presentation, as Bill mentioned, is a condensed version of all the options that they shared with us. We were really, questioned the location, and I have become convinced that the location is the right location. It's not too close to Tide Street, and it, can be perpendicular to both buildings rather than at an awkward angle. So I feel convinced that they have it in the right location. I think the asymmetry is a complex issue, and I really appreciate what Commissioner Ron said, but I have also been further convinced as this project has developed that, in my opinion, we're not setting precedent, we're just making choices based on options that we have. I think the notion that the structure can be supported by or reinforced by the building that is in construction now to eliminate any columns coming down and interrupting the public realm is a benefit. And I really see that as a choice that I think the asymmetry is, a good outcome rather than having columns coming down in the building. And that's just my perspective. I also think that the asymmetry and the simplification, but yet, dynamism of the underside of the bridge helps mitigate that 1 foot offset because it is true, as Bill noted, that the floor levels are not level. And if it's perfectly symmetrical and if it's perfectly flat, I do think that that reading would be more legible. So I feel from a design perspective, that's actually might be a benefit, the asymmetry. Then we talked a lot about material choices. We had them render in the bridge in many different choices, and based on the existing buildings and the future building to come, LC2, this palette does seem to be, the palette that minimizes the impact of the view of the bridge. So I am supportive of the design. The complexity has been simplified and it is a lot less complex. Maybe the one image that you can go to is the night rendering, where I feel like maybe the lighting is still something to work on. I wonder if uplighting that central structural element is actually making it seem a little bit heavier, and that's just something that could be further refined as you develop the design. I know that you're still in the early phases of design, but those are my comments.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mimi.
Yeah, I'll pop in here. I think I've also been at the majority, if not all of the meetings. I think this is a pretty complex condition. I appreciate the work that the proponents done to sort of illustrate this and test various scenarios here. I do think that the product has gotten I don't want to say simpler, but it has gotten more focused and probably more impactful. Whilst I think the asymmetry is a nice moment there that is resolved in an overall, that is sort of a kind of a byproduct of the site. And I think it's something that does create a little bit of a kind of curiosity and complexity without being an overwhelming thing that is a detriment to the design. And I think it's handled and sort of put into an overall composition that I think works really well. So I think just all in all, I'm just sort of satisfied, and I would kind of commend the proponent here. And I do think with any project there is a risk of precedent, but I do think that's why we're here, and that's why every project's going to be looked at on its own merit. So I'm not as worried about that point, but I do certainly respect the need to be very critical about what we propose here. But all in all, I think that I appreciate the work here, and I think it's come a long way, and I'm excited by where this is.
Thanks, Jonathan. Laura?
Thank you for the presentation and for a really tight explanation. I want to clarify something with the proponent team, though. The reason that we have an asymmetrical bridge has to do with level changes, right? Where you enter one building and where you enter the other. Is that correct? Was that the driver for the asymmetry?
That's part of the expression there, but Laura, the other is just how to handle the loads of this.
Yes, okay.
So
okay, so that kind of reinforce each other, I guess.
Absolutely.
So thank you for the simplicity of the underside. That's always been something that I've been concerned about, because in a way that almost more than anything as a pedestrian is what you will see. And so I think you've come to a really calm resolution of that. And I support everything that all the other commissioners have said. The one thing, you know how in design, when you start to peel away things, something else becomes apparent to you. And so the only thing I'll say is that the supports, the asymmetrical rods that are inside, I think could use a little more study. And I think that was within the comments of the Boston Planning. Somehow they feel it may be like the weight relationship between that center column and that piece. It feels doesn't feel quite right to me in terms of like visually balancing it. Maybe I'm even saying that it's not believable structurally. But no, I know it works. That's not what I'm saying, is that, there's like this visual interpretation. So that's really the only comment, and I think that's pretty good if that's the only comment. So thank you very much. I'll look forward to it being there one day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. And David, I see your hand up. Christina, I wanted to just check in with you and Lizzie and see how we're doing on time.
I would say we have 8 more minutes of deliberation before we should check for public comment.
That is very precise. Thank you, Christina. All right, David. David, you're on mute.
Apologies. I haven't had the benefit of the process here, but I thank Joe for taking us through some of that. I do have the benefit of going down I will be going under this bridge every single day, twice a day. Two things I want to say simply. I appreciate that this has been a process that has distilled ideas. And I think what we know, because this commission has talked a lot about bridges over the last, 10 or 15 years. The simpler, the more transparent, and the lighter, the better, always. And I think it has gotten lighter and simpler in the underside and the faceting, rejecting some of the levels of detail, embossing the metal, that only added complexity. And my second point is, I think Mimi made a great point. And if there's one piece here, and I understand it, I think I understand it structurally, that feels big, heavy, it is that big beam that runs between the two buildings. And I'm sure there's not one bit of exaggeration in that section. But I agree with Mimi that I would ask you to really study how it's illuminated in order to diminish it and not celebrate it. The lightness of the envelope on the 3 sides is really very nice. I think lightness goes a long way to success in these bridges, and I wouldn't celebrate the heaviest piece of the composition.
I'm going to have class. Can you go to, let's take another viewpoint here, David. Thank you for your comments. And I think what I'm hearing here is maybe de-emphasizing that center beam. That center beam obviously was there. We moved the structure from the corners, upper corners, to that center portion, which was a very good move. So we can celebrate the glass. But I think what we're hearing here, and I agree, is somehow reducing the amount of light onto that, and perhaps we get that desired effect.
In the night sky, you almost want that beam to just disappear, and you see the very simple lines and the transparency. But I think overall, very elegant solution.
Thank you, David. Commissioners, we have a few more minutes. If there are other comments, just raise your digital hand or wave and I'll look for you. I wanted to add one comment. I haven't been part of the subcommittee, but have been was part of the first presentation, the introduction presentation. And I wanted to pick up on this thread that we've just been talking about with lighting. And I'm so glad that Mimi raised this and David as well. And the other comment that I wanted to add is that it's hard to tell compositionally in this slide and then the other slide that shows the nighttime view, kind of what the coloration or the light quality is. And Joe, just a question for you. I mean, it's hard to know whether the light quality in the 2 buildings, 1 and 2, kind of have a warm light, which is what you would expect. And this seems to have a very cool light. And I would just encourage you to make those more uniform if possible, because we will be experiencing this bridge compositionally with 1 and 2, and also with just the street, the public realm portion of those buildings that we're seeing in this diagram as well.
Good point in the fact that they are LEDs. We can control the color temperatures, in that, and we can dial in and get it to the right and to have it complementary to the buildings and, what's the right temperature for also that public realm. So we have that flexibility.
I think that's fantastic. Any other commissioner comments? I think Christina's given us 1 or 2 minutes.
Just maybe very quickly to piggyback on the last point, I do think that that's warrants the eventual mock-up to really consider lighting as well. Just because I think rendering is really hard to kind of get lighting right. So I think that's just something to maybe flag as part of the mock-up down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Jonathan.
And I'll just chime in and support Laura's comment, because I think the reading of that beam is so strong in contrast to those thin cables. Like the balance of those components is what could be certainly further studied.
The lighting that you're showing on the interior is also greatly improved. I think that it feels as if you're trying to wrap the corridor in light, but it's just sort of glows now, that inside view that you had. So I think it'll be more pleasant for people to pass through it.
Thanks, Laura. Christina, I think we are ready to move to any public comment.
Lizzie, if you want to bring up the slide. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised, so we're going to close the public testimony period.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate the proponent presentation and also all of the really good comments from commissioners. Commissioners, we now are at that point where we need to offer a recommendation. And would anyone like to take a first pass at what that recommendation might be?
Sure. I'll a motion to approve the project with further study from the planning department staff on lighting and structural elements, the proportion of the structural elements.
Thank you, Mimi. Any other elements that we want to add to that motion, commissioners? Not seeing any hands on that. So can we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, if you could say aye. And I just wanted to let commissioners know that we've been joined by Catherine Morris and also Amy Chambers. If you're in favor of that motion, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
McYoung Kim?
Aye.
Mimi Love?
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Aye.
David Manfredi?
Aye.
Catherine, do you want to vote on this or abstain?
I'll abstain.
All right. Bill Ron?
Aye.
Laura Solano?
Aye.
Kirk Sykes is recused. And myself, Linda Eastley, aye. The project is approved. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Very insightful comments, and we will take the momentum of today's conversation and take that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chuck.
And Linda, before we start the next presentation, I just want to recognize that Commissioner Haseen has joined us as well.
Great. Sorry I missed you, David. So we're ready to move now to 83 Leo Birmingham Parkway in Brighton. And commissioners, this is their third presentation to BCDC. Commissioner Sykes remains recused for this project as well. And during our comment period after the proponent gives their presentation and Seth offers a summary, just wanted to remind you that Commissioner Evans, Love, Ron, and Solano were at the last subcommittee. So we will ask you for your comments first when we get to that portion of the agenda. So I think we're ready for the Nordblum Stantec Copley Wolf team to start their presentation for Leo Birmingham.
Great, thank you so much. So happy to be here. I'm Tamara Roy from Stantec, architecture principal, and with me is Ian Ramey from Copley Wolf, landscape architects, and also Todd Fremont Smith from Nordblum Properties. And we're going to share our screen. We thank you all for your comments along the way. Can you see my screen?
It's coming up, I think, Tamara.
Okay.
Just thinking about it.
It says I'm screen sharing.
There we go.
Okay, wonderful. So this is the site of 83 Leo, Birmingham, which is a very wide street here on the bottom. And we have about 340 units in the project, of which 57 are affordable, nearly 200 parking spaces, a very high percentage of open space. And our site area is approximately 2 acres. Get this to advance. There we go. And as we've mentioned, it's just a fantastic threshold site at the corner of Market Street in Leo, Birmingham, but it's also sort of in this ribbon of historic green space around the Charles River and in a new emerging neighborhood. It's very well connected, as this shows, both bikes and pedestrians and transit. So our concept is into the woods, and we took a site with around a 24-foot average drop from one side to the other to take the opportunity to conceal our parking, develop a building in 3 wings where the open part of it faces directly south to take advantage of that for our amenity courtyard. We then are landscaping the front of it because the road is going on a diet, and we've clad it in warm wood and charcoal gray. And this is our final rendering. And what we heard both times from you all was really compliments on the architecture and landscape of the project, but specifically these points, which we then are bringing back to you today with some more revisions. So one is bringing the green character to the boundary of the amenity courtyard. It was a simple fence, and it's been improved thanks to a lot of Laura's comments about trying to integrate that to the slope and the hills of the greenery at this corner. Adding more green space to the center of the cul-de-sac down on Soldiersville Place, and making sure to refine the connection that we're looking at from the top to the bottom of the site. And then for architecture, improving what's seen from Soldiers Field Road. There's a pedestrian passage there we'll look at, and trying to celebrate both entrances a bit more. So I'm going to hand it over to Ian, since most of the comments were landscape focused.
Great, thanks, Tamara. Hi, everyone. So just as a quick refresh on the landscape plan, we are trying to really lean into this idea of the tree preservation and use the existing urban wild that's on the site to kind of guide the development of the project. In terms of the public realm, we have our primary front door, which is indicated in red. That's facing the neighborhood towards Boston Landing. We have a secondary entry along Soldiers Field Road, indicated in orange at the cul-de-sac. I think at a high level, our comments really were about, that we heard was about taking that idea of the grove and extending that more literally across the frontage of the project. So I think if we go to the next slide, we can take a look at that. So this blows up the side of the project facing Boston Landing. The little blow up on the left is what we had before, and the larger plan is where we are today. And what we ended up doing was increasing the buffer from that southern facing courtyard space with more landscape area, with a slope berm landform, and increasing the amount of vegetation there. Again, trying to take the character of that existing grove that is to the left of the site and extend that across. So we really feel like the building is sort of enshrouded in that greenery. The little sections that are on the lower left show the before and after. The top one shows where we had before just a fence and a hedge and some lower level plantings. And then the slide or the section underneath it shows the berming. We've introduced a wall to get more soil depth and really increase the depth and the height of the vegetation there to kind of really make that a stronger edge. Another thing that is shown on this, which didn't really come up in the BCDC, but through our conversations with IAG and with staff, is that the drop off along Leo Birmingham Parkway has gotten a little bit extended from about 3 cars to about 5. And now we have a stronger vegetated separation from the sidewalk at the drop off from that multi-use path to really limit the amount of crossings there. It's a little safer condition.
I just want to flag to the proponent team that you've reached the halfway point of your allotted presentation time.
Okay,
Great.
thanks.
We're also on the halfway slide.
Yeah, so this blows up the lower level Soldiers Field Place turnaround. One comment that we heard was to do something with that expansive pavement in the turnaround. So we've introduced an island, a teardrop shape, where we're planted in the middle, and then we have some cobble aprons that go around it just to accommodate the larger vehicle. We've also diversified the experience of the dog area for residents. So we've bisected that into a smaller dog, bigger dog area, and introduced some topography there to make it a little more interesting. We've also, and this will come up in the next slide, started to look at the pedestrian connectivity from this cul-de-sac to the upper elevation. Slide. This slide shows all the different configurations of where we tried to get this pedestrian connectivity from the lower elevation of Soldiers Field Place up to Leo Birmingham Parkway. Again, it's about a 24-foot grade change, all sorts of accessibility and access constraints to deal with. Through our process, we've heard that option 3, which is through the woods, that's going right through that grove, is the preferred direction, and that's what we've expanded to show you. So this shows how we are planning to make that pedestrian connection from Soldiers Field Place up to Leo and Birmingham Parkway. Again, we're starting at about elevation 18 with a pathway that's gently sloped. As we get towards the bottom of that slope, we have a structured ramp that's on grade, and that gives us basically a landing point for an elevated boardwalk structure that kind of flies through the slope and tries to miss as many trees as possible. And that brings us up to an outlet closer to the intersection with Birmingham Parkway and Market Street. We've made some revisions there as to how that layout works, and I've been working with a boardwalk contractor to try to get this sorted out. And then here's some quick sections that show how that works. So the section A is a section taken from the cul-de-sac along the north side of the building where we have a slope walk. You see where the handrails are, that there's a ramp that gets us up to that intermediate landing. And then from there, we begin our ascent on the boardwalk. The 2 sections on the bottom show the condition at the top. Section B, that's where we're coming off of that upper elevation with a slight ramp down and an overlook. And then section C shows sort of that boardwalk mid-slope with a widened area where we can have people pull off from the path to catch their breath and enjoy being in that wooded context. Because we will be disturbing some of these trees on the slope, we think there's an opportunity to intermix some native understory and evergreen trees to sort of add a little more buffer and privacy to the residential units in the building.
Just want to flag that there's 2 minutes remaining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to pick up from here. This is the pedestrian passage coming from Soldiers Field Place across toward our site, and we know that there's a loading dock there. We thought there was an opportunity to be able to put an artist mural here, so we put a placeholder image, and the client will work with Brighton artists to get that done. And then the comment about the making more of the entrances. So this was what the entrance was before at the lower level. And talking with the neighbors and the IAG, they really said, why is this building not very colorful? So we sort of added a little bit of color at the doors and a little more framing here. And then this is our final slide, which is also at the front entrance. We've really worked quite a bit on this in terms of improving that presence of the entry. We've extended out these pillars, extended out the canopy, created a little niche where people can wait for their Uber or or other TNC. Got also some color at the doorway. And then, as Ian mentioned, all of the landscape improvements that have happened around this central community plaza that we hope will be this great gathering area along the multi-use trail for folks to have water filling and bike repair and the blue bikes here as well. So great place to meet your neighbor and create an opportunity and a benefit for the whole neighborhood along this path. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Ian. Seth, before I turn it over to you, Ian, I'm anticipating a question from the commissioners. Do you have a lighting diagram for the pathway that goes up?
We do not at this time, but we have been speaking with the boardwalk folks about how to integrate that into the boardwalk. We know that's going to be really important to have that safe and open and well lit. Yes.
All right. I figured if you did, I would have you flash it up quickly for the commissioners. All right. Seth's going to offer some summary comments, and then we'll open it up to the commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner Eastley. So very quickly, we think the project has made great strides in responding to requested public realm updates, including the courtyards and the entry plazas in particular, as well as changes to building materiality and the distinctiveness of the entry portals. And the project was really meaningfully improved by the incorporation of this pedestrian path connecting the lower level of Soldiers Field Place and the upper level of Leo Birmingham Parkway. The image that you see on the right was an earlier draft. You saw a more refined version tonight that addressed many of our concerns. But I think moving forward, as the design for the pathway comes into greater focus, we'll look at refinement on the configuration materiality of this path in relationship to the building, to the trees, and to the sidewalk and roadway itself. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Seth. All right, Commissioners Evans, Love, Ron, and Solano, you have been at recent subcommittees, so we will let you take the first opportunity for comment.
Maybe if the proponent can bring up their show.
Maybe one of the diagrams that shows us the open space and building in context. You predicted our question, I see. Okay. Thank you. All right. Mimi, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think this project has been a very strong project from the beginning since we saw it, and it's only, gotten more refined and improved with the addition of that path. I think you were spot on, Linda, on asking about the lighting, because that's the one thing that I was thinking about as it's an incredibly useful path. Not only for the residents of this building, but for the neighborhood, but it needs to be safe, and lighting will be an important component. So, I'm fully supportive, and I imagine that'll continue to develop as this, talking to the boardwalk manufacturer, whoever you're talking to. I think that's an important piece. I will say I still feel like the entrances aren't quite right. I can't even really recognize the changes from the last time we met, but I think that's a issue with the planning department to continue working on the entrances, and maybe they've now become too different from each other. But I do recognize that the entrance off of the Leo Birmingham Way is the more important entry, and I like the scale and the moves and materiality. I'm still not exactly sure, but those are fairly minor comments. It's a very nice project.
Thanks, Mimi. Lara, Bill, or Jonathan, do you want to chime in with any of your comments since the last subcommittee? Lara? You're on mute.
Yep, thank you. Really nice work. And I don't have any comments except the boardwalk, which I think makes sense because that was almost brand new the last time that we saw it. And so it's had the least opportunity to be to be improved. If you could go back to the section that you were showing and then of the boardwalk. There you go. I would encourage you in talking with the manufacturer to think about how you might move the columns or the stanchions from the edge, and even maybe have the ambition of only having one column in the center of that. That will do a couple of things. It will make the boardwalk feel like it's floating more, which I think is important since you've got that experience in the canopy. And I think it'll make it feel less of the ground and more, a little more magical hanging in the air. The other thing about that area is I would think about the woodland edge planting and supplement what you would typically find, you know, on the edge of a woodland to reinforce this idea that you have created really a mini forest, right? Not in the true sense of that word these days, but that you've really kind of carved the site out and revealed something. And, you know, you might think about things that bloom early, like witch hazel or dogwood, or, you know, whatever you think, cornice. And that's for both people on the boardwalk who kind of look down and feel a little more embedded in the woods, as well as those in the building looking up that slope, so that it doesn't feel like they're exposed to the views that come down. They're given something as well. Other than that, my comment is to go around like where section A is and decide how that transition happens from woods all the way down. Like, do you have enough planting? Is the scale of the planting right? Because there's a strength that has developed here where it really is starting to feel as if the project has been carved out of the woods. And I would just encourage you to push that a little bit more. But otherwise, I think it's terrific. You've been highly responsive to the comments that we heard in general. So thank you.
Thank you for the comments. They're good suggestions.
Thanks, Laura, for that. Jonathan, I see your hand up, and Bill will give you a chance if you'd like to comment after that, and then David will come back to you.
Thanks. I'll be really quick. Last meeting was the first time I saw it. That's a great project. It's one of those buildings that I think if you look at the massing, it could tend to be overwhelming, but I think the architectural language is working really well to sort of create a facade, a strategy that works well. I would agree with Mimi's comment on the entry. I think you've got a really nice language of these sort of vertical orientation that I think it's a little bit lost with the entry, where it's a little bit too squat and horizontal. I'm looking at the kind of axon or ending towards the back there, and also the kind of these outy nubs, which I think is just not anywhere on the building, so it's a little foreign. I think it's definitely a moment that is worth having kind of an exception to the overall diagram, but I would agree with me that that's probably a moment for further iteration. But again, I think if I'm commenting on that, that's sort of a testament to how overall the product is really, really strong and kind of really exciting. So yeah, well done.
Thank you. We will definitely look at that on the next iteration, Jonathan and Mimi.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bill, did you want to
I'll be very, very quick. I just want to compliment both the petitioners and the architects for taking a large building and fitting it in a very easy way. And likewise, then for figuring a way how to deal with this grade change through the site. I just think it's a very nice project.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
David? Did we lose David? Oh, David, you're just on mute.
Oh, sorry. I was
There
going to
you
say,
are.
Hi, everyone. Bill said it perfectly. I think the building is really successful, fits in very nicely. I really like the boardwalk solution. I think Laura's suggestion about making it float or be a little bit more sculptural is a really nice idea that maybe could be explored. And maybe this was mentioned, but these kinds of boardwalks can be really treacherous in snow and ice. And I think that maybe taking a page from ski resorts around the area that have some kind of textured zone, maybe along one edge or something that really allows you to navigate these, it's almost like that black gritty sort of zone, because maintaining this in snow and blizzards and people coming back from the bus and going down these things, and just trying to imagine it in this kind of climate. So maybe there's a way between that you can think of to elegantly integrate some texture.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
And I'm sure our clients' insurance will also
Wow.
appreciate that for liability.
Yeah, I mean, these decks are like in every, ski situation
Right.
all
No,
over
it's
the
a
place.
great
So I
point.
think it's a way of thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks for the examples.
Thank you, David. Catherine?
Hello, good evening. I agree with all the commissioners, definitely about the lighting. I was like, where is it? Where is it? Couple of things. I want to double down on Commissioner Love and Commissioner Evans around the entryways, because there's a few of them, right? And I think there's a real true moment of distinction, so that doesn't from a pedestrian standpoint, folks entering and exiting this building, just that creating a unique design, or one that just signals that this is the entrance or entrances into the building, is something I just want to double down on. It just kind of hides in plain sight. And just given the uniqueness of the design, I think there's a way to just make that more distinctive. To what Commissioner Hasina had talked about regarding the slope, the first thing that came to mind for me is what is going to be the runoff system as things come down that slope, right? So when the ice melts, when the snow and the water, like, what is the system to capture that, because that's just very real, given our environment. And to the aspect of a textured pathway, just thinking about more so from an accessibility standpoint, I've seen where, there's different patterns in which that can provide grip, so folks don't slip down or whatever the case is. Just worth considering in terms of design, or an added feature that might be unbeknownst to a pedestrian. So just wanted to name that.
Thank you, Catherine.
Linda, my hand raising function doesn't seem to be working today, so if there's no one else, I'd love to chime in.
We've got Anne Marie, and then can I come back to you, McYoung, after Anne Marie? Perfect.
Sure, and I will be fast. Just again, ditto on the comment with the entrances. There's a lot going on with this project and this site in a good way, but just helping people orient themselves. And then I just want to go back. Could you pull up the slide with the view from the pedestrian passage? Because I think the slide you presented tonight is different from the one in the draft presentation. So I just would encourage, as you look at the building entrances, to also look at this. I realize it's a loading dock. I realize the building needs a loading dock. These are essential aspects, but I also think these, how we connect Soldiers Field Road with this interior space is important, and just wonder if there's something more that might happen on the building beyond, a mural. I assume that's a mural over the loading dock garage door, correct?
Yes.
So, maybe is there something that can happen with the architecture of the building that, just to the right of the Brighton, where I assume the door is, it says Brighton, there's that kind of blank wall. Just, is there something that you can do to create some visual interest that's more architectural? I'm not that the public art can't, but could it be more integrated in some way? Maybe perhaps could the garage door and the building face become some of that public art. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll look at that.
Thanks, Anne Marie. McYoung?
I'm not going to repeat what everyone else says. Ditto. I wanted to just I haven't actually seen this project before, so I think I just wanted to actually go back to Boston planning and probably to this team. There's a lot of interesting housing projects that are being developed, and just as a reminder to everybody, this is not this bucolic kind of neighborhood, but it is framed by the Mass Turnpike. It is framed by Soldier Field Road, and Leo Birmingham Parkway is also double laned to, it's a very busy road. It is not pedestrian in any way. And this is the first project that I can remember that now jumps the road across Leo Birmingham. We've seen a bunch of residential projects on the other side of Leo Birmingham. And a lot of them are housing projects. And so I just leave this challenge with both the design team, because I think you've done an excellent job in connecting things internally. But I think it would be good as we look at future projects in this whole neighborhood to ask the question, what makes a neighborhood? Like, now that we're making so much housing here, and there are a lot of people living here, but plus there are these big box retail stores, like, how can we make sure, and all these projects are making very lovely, more internal green spaces and open spaces that are often more private. And then there's like a playground across the street, if I'm remembering correctly, but across the street's a little perilous. And so I would just ask, as Seth and other folks go back and look at this project, just to make sure that, I know that I saw a planning document where there were these blocks of the buildings, but it occurred to me as I saw this project that this is the one place in Boston where people have had the luxury, or development teams have had the luxury to create really expansive open spaces, and to understand kind of what the open space plan of this is. Because when I see each of these individual streetscapes, I think, oh, that's lovely. But then if I imagine it kind of in its context, I have a harder time understanding how we're building a neighborhood here. And so I just wanted to just put that thought in everyone's brain, just to make sure we remember that this is basically a spaghetti of highways, very busy, very vehicularly focused. And I think every proponent who's come forward has made a really good faith effort to make a pedestrian experience. I'd love to see how those pedestrian experiences connect to each other, and the goals for future development that connect this project. I've forgotten to the one, it's not in Portsmouth, it's, but how can we make sure that we're not just making these discrete, interesting, beautiful projects, but make sure that they're all connected somehow, which is what a neighborhood is, right? So just pennies for you.
Thank you, McYoung, for that. Really appreciate it, and very much agree with the sentiment and the importance of that viewpoint, as the surrounding parcels will inevitably redevelop, right? As part of this, and conceive of this as a community neighborhood.
Right. These guys are the first kids on the block. There's another development, larger housing development. Is if Boston Properties could start to, Boston Planning could start to create some pedestrian connections, like, where are we connecting across Leo Birmingham, and how can we make sure that future development starts to follow some guidelines about not just vehicular connectivity and service, but pedestrian experience, or else we'll end up with a series of individual voices that are not interconnected.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we
proponent team, but
we fought for the connection, right, from the lower level to the upper level, to make sure that this, neighborhood that's otherwise cut off from
Right.
pedestrian networks is able to connect to that upper level and ultimately to the T station off page to the right.
Right.
And I think it was in maybe the first presentation of this project. There's investment from the state right now into a redevelopment of Leo Birmingham Parkway itself, putting it on a significant road diet. I forget whether it's reducing
I
it by
remember
roughly
seeing that,
half
yeah.
and expanding this multimodal path. And so there's that investment in this, underinvested green space along Leo Birmingham Parkway that I think was a factor in the developer moving forward with this project,
Right,
and will certainly
right.
help connect this piece of this entire sort of isolated piece of property into the larger open space network. But certainly crossing Soldiers Field Road remains a challenge and will be in the future.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I love these comments because this particular kind of series of sites does remain an island within the city, and it doesn't have to be, because there are these amazing destinations, whether you're trying to get to the Charles River, or I think what this project is starting to do really well is being able to get you to kind of the T, right? And thank you so much for realigning that boardwalk area to match up with a crosswalk. I know the earlier iterations were still figuring that out, but I do think that there's a reason now to have this site as a neighborhood amenity in its own right, and to start to then make these more regional connections, which I think is what McYoung is also talking about. All right, we've had some really good comments. Christina, do we have any public comments to add to these?
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised, so we will close the public testimony period.
Thanks, Christina. I know we've had a lot of commissioners talking a little bit about elegance today. How can we think about the boardwalk as being more elegant with maybe even the structure? How can we think about the entries being a little bit more pronounced and elegant, and even some of the surfaces? We almost passed this project in the first go, but appreciate you coming back to subcommittee, and now we need to make a recommendation. Commissioners, would anyone like to take the first pass at that?
Just approve the project.
Motion to approve, McYoung?
Yes,
All
that's
right.
I've been doing this long enough. I should
No, it's all good. It's all
Motion
good.
to
I just wanted to make
approve.
sure.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. All in favor, please say aye. And just a note that Kathy Kotaritis has also joined us. Jonathan Evans,
Aye.
David Hassin,
Aye.
McYoung Kim, McYoung. I think you're
Aye.
on mute. All right. Kathy Kotaritis,
Aye.
Mimi Love,
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow,
Aye.
David Manfredi. David? We can't hear you, but I'm reading your lips that it's an aye. There you are. All right. Catherine Morris,
Aye.
Bill Ron,
Aye.
Laura Solano,
Aye.
Kirk Sykes is recused, and myself, Linda Eastley, aye. The project is approved. Congratulations, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right, we're now going to shift gears to the 2 new projects that Christina introduced at the top of the meeting. And Mimi, I'm going to hand this over to you.
I know, and I will say we are right on time. We're 2 minutes behind our agenda, which is kind of amazing. So I am going to stick with Linda's perfect record she is going here. So with that, Christina, let's pass it to you to introduce the
Great.
projects or the proponent team.
Lizzie, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the staff slides, we'll pass it over to Amy.
Perfect. Good evening, commissioners. I am going to present some information with respect to the project 251 Causeway Street in the West End. This project, called North Station Gateway, is located at 251 Causeway in the Bullfinch Triangle zoning district and general area subdistrict. The proposed program includes 300 hotel rooms, 420 residential units, 30,000 square feet of retail, restaurant, amenity space, and 150 parking spaces in a 447-foot tall, 560,000 square foot building. Next slide, please. The site is located in the Bullfinch Triangle plan, which was adopted in 1990. It was developed to restore the architectural integrity, traditional scale, and unique urban character of this neighborhood. New developments in the neighborhood are encouraged through this plan to be contextual to the historic fabric of the neighborhood while enhancing its connectivity to surrounding areas. Guidelines are given for design and dimensional requirements and are outlined in the plan itself. It's important to keep the goals of the plan in mind, noting that there have not been other plans or development plans or zoning, in the area since this time. And therefore, we understand its dated nature and the large amount of change that has occurred in the area with respect to the surrounding context. And we think that a delicate balance must be made in taking both of those things into account. It's also important to note that the site being located in the Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay District, or CFROD, CFROD is designated for areas susceptible to high sea level rise. Due to this flooding danger, there are specific guidelines given by CFROD to make sure there is resilience in anything built. CFROD is a crucial overlay that this project must follow to provide the needed safety. And it should be noted that this map shows the site, its proximity to the historic district and the plan area, as well as the CFROD areas. The three buildings on the site are all Massachusetts Historical Commission historic inventory due to the significant nature of their architecture and uses, though none of the buildings are individually listed landmarks. The site itself does not exist in the Bullfinch Triangle National Register Historic District, which was established in 1986. And as you can see, that is located further to the east. Next slide, please.
And so a flash history, the district was conceived by Charles Bullfinch in 1808 and was a nexus of rail infrastructure, industrial, and commercial uses in its early years. Today, the historic district is made up of late 19th and early 20th century commercial structures that were once the center of the region's furniture trade. Over its history, the district has experienced constant evolution as a regional transportation hub with commercial uses and, more recently, entertainment, residential, and hospitality uses. Next slide, please. The Bullfinch Triangle today is bounded by Causeway Street, North Washington Street, New Chardon Street, and Merrimack Street. The site is located in the northeast corner of the district at the intersection of North Washington and Causeway and flanks Medford Street. The triangle is surrounded by neighborhoods of the North End to the right, the West End to the left, the Edge of Government Center, and the North Station Boston Garden Hub on Causeway complex. The old elevated central artery and Green Line used to bisect the neighborhood just east of Canal Street. The formalized Bullfinch Triangle Historic District lies to the west of this area at a predominant height of approximately 80 feet. The Central Artery Tunnel project put these large infrastructural elements below grade and replaced them with a new fabric of between 110 and 160 feet in height between 2007 and 2018. The surrounding areas across Causeway Street then saw significant redevelopment in the following years with the TD Garden, Lovejoy Wharf, and the Hub on Causeway, and more recently, the Government Center garage is being transformed into a multi-block mixed-use complex. The fabric of the North End across Washington Street remains relatively unchanged, with smaller scale reinvestment over the last few decades. Next slide, please.
So Article 46 of the zoning regulations sets the max height at 100 feet and max FAR at 7, provided that the project is subject to large project review. It should be noted that the zoning requires a step back from Causeway Street. Starting at a height of 65 feet, the building must step back at least 25 feet from Causeway Street. The proposed project is located in the Seafraud with a sea level rise base flood height of 19.5 feet. This will have implications for the uses under that base floodplain and the design strategies for flood safety. While there are no parking requirements for the Bullfinch Triangle District, this project will be subject to Boston Transportation Department's large project parking maximum of 285 spaces. The North Station Mobility Action Plan has planned numerous improvements to bus, pedestrian, and cycling circulation in the area, and particular attention should be paid to the design of the pickup and drop-off areas, as well as parking and service entrances. Next slide, please. Section 46 Section 46-8.1 is taken directly from the zoning code. These provisions are derived from the 1990 Bullfinch Triangle District Plan. These are some of the specific guidelines and highlights given for new developments to the neighborhood. So commissioners, as you kind of take in the project itself, we would encourage just bearing in mind the design considerations here on the screen. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. So we'll hand it over to the proponent team to begin their presentation, and we'll just set a 10-minute timer for y'all.
Great, thank you, commissioners. My name is Jesse Yeabear. I'm a vice president of development with the RMR Group, the project proponent, joined with by a few members of our design team, including David Epstein from Gensler and Kaki Martin from KMDG. I just want to make kind of the point at the outset here that we've been pretty intentional in kind of not advancing our design too far. This is, as you'll see clearly, at a conceptual stage. I think we have a lot of conviction around the development program itself, but I think we remain very open-minded in terms of things like building materials, massing, building orientation. And, you know, the intent here was to get in front of the community with a proposal, solicit feedback from the stakeholders, including the neighbors and the city and this commission. And so that's kind of where we feel we are in that process. And so we're kind of undergoing, you know, this meeting in particular, in that spirit, really all the meetings we've been having on this project so far. So with that, assuming we can get the deck up on the screen.
Right. Can you see it yet? I'm not sure.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Is it full screen?
David,
It is not
can you try to press Command L?
Command L, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And commissioners, I think, you know, having the proponents come earlier has been a request of our commission. So in that regard, I think we're excited to see this early on to get some initial feedback from this commission.
I'm seeing it on my screen. Are you seeing it on your
Yes,
screen?
it
You
looks
are.
great.
Oh, terrific. Okay.
So, you know, the planning department did a really good job in kind of orienting everybody to the context here. I'll only make one further point with respect to this slide, which is that, you know, with the Bill Russell Bridge coming online and a lot of the other transit improvements, particularly post Big Dig that have come online in this area over the last, you know, 15 to 20 years, I think you're finally starting to see some of the kind of the density surrounding the North Station Transit Hub that is something we've historically seen around Back Bay and South Station and some of the other bigger hubs in Boston. So between that and the fact that with the new bridge coming online, which essentially lands kind of right at the corner of Causeway and North Washington Street, We believe this represents a new arrival experience into the city, particularly from a multimodal perspective, and really frames our project site as a legitimate gateway site. And we've kind of tried to represent and reflect that and kind of the building massing and orientation. And with that, I'll kick it over to David to go through the design.
Hi, I'm David Epstein, design principal at Gensler. I'm going to take you through, this is conceptual massing, and that's kind of looking at a program, how it could fit in the city is really the major thing we've been thinking about, and we're going to share with you today. This is the stacking diagram that you very much saw just a minute ago, about making a mid-rise 150-foot high building that would hold the hotel, the 300-room hotel. And then on top of that, placing the 420-unit apartment building and pushing that to the north of the site, keeping it quite slender. So just to show you what that looks like conceptually, what our design logic is that we're creating a building that where the hotel is, that's at that 150-foot height, that's at the same orientation as the rest of the triangle, trying to push that as a nice, beautiful scaled building, and then placing the tower, pushing it to the north, kind of pushing it away from the triangle and frankly the north end, keeping a slender tower, keeping the east and west side slender so that we reduce the amount of shadows to the north end. And then the next thing we think was so important about this project is changing the public realm that's there today, lifting the building up, pushing the plan of the massing inward to get the sidewalks to be much larger than they are today. And then also the resilience that was just spoken about, lifting the building up for the resilience of creating kind of, in a way, a bit of a porch around the building that lifts it up, pulls it out of the ground plane. And then celebrating this gateway site by lifting the entire residential tower up above that corner, the corner of North Washington and Causeway. This sort of sets up what that frame is like, by pushing our building, which is to the bottom right-hand corner, at the edge of the gateway, it's sitting on Causeway, the mass itself, holding that smaller scale hotel building at the same orientation of the buildings of the triangle and creating a flat iron building out of that building. And then when you look at this photo from above, from the west end, looking towards the building, placing it almost at the edge corner of the site as you arrive on the Bill Russell Bridge to the city, and having it be one of the buildings, the taller buildings that are on the Causeway, as part of that dialogue of those towers. The most important piece, I think, is very much about the ground plane and how it's going to change what's there today so significantly. And with that, Kaki, you want to talk about the ground plane?
Great. Thanks, David, and good evening, everybody. We, as everyone said, we're really preliminary, but I want to sort of share with you the landscape approach and the sort of three strategies we have going to sort of with a primary goal of improving and maximizing a positive public realm experience. So the first is David's and Jesse have gotten at, which is to take full advantage of the increased or widened section between the curb and the facade from the existing condition. This will allow the incorporation of complete streets guidelines to increase the width of the path of travel. It helps us incorporate a planting and street furnishing zone at the curb, and allows us to incorporate a frontage zone at the building face to the extent possible. This is particularly impactful along the North Washington edge of the project. The introduction of tree canopy here, we also feel creates a more comfortable and scaled pedestrian-friendly green corridor, which really starts to be a link between the Greenway and the waterfront open space and the connectivity to Charlestown to the north. I think you all know that the current condition is treeless and grim. Secondly, another strategy we have is really maximizing that grade change between the sidewalk level and the resiliency FFE, using that as an opportunity to support the experience of the public realm. with elements such as seating steps, elevated terraces, and impactful areas of planting, which support the open space experience at both the sidewalk level and the podium level. And lastly, on the south side of the parcel, taking advantage of an at-grade ground floor retail space that can help activate a small south-facing pocket plaza with a heavy planted edge. And in this location, we also think there's an opportunity to explore the possibility of rationalizing the crossing of Medford Street to be perpendicular rather than the existing very lengthy current diagonal crossing.
I just want to flag to the proponent team that you've reached the halfway point of your allotted presentation time. Thank you.
Good.
So back to you, David.
Now, a little bit about, again, preliminary massing, taking this diagram and applying the skin just really for scale more than anything. We know we're going to build a resilient, sustainable passive house project. But this sort of shows, again, most importantly, slender tower pushed to the north side, a smaller kind of flat iron building to the south side, and connecting with the scale of the Bullfinch Triangle, the tower now being part of the towers on Causeway. As you approach on North Washington and Causeway, lifting the tower up, creating this higher open space by lifting it to the sky, creating the gateway, getting what Kaki just spoke about, this kind of lifted ground plane with trees on the street side, and then a terrace on the third floor that's part of the amenities, and then a roof terrace on 11. So you get this kind of greening of the street, a space that's this triangle that's created of a deck space, and then a roof space. And then as you see it from North Washington, you're moving northway on the road, this flat iron building lifted off the ground plane, creating this larger sidewalk by pushing the building in, and then this small pocket park at the end of the nose of the site, creating this kind of buffer zone and a bit of a safety zone because the street's quite busy with buses and cars, North Washington, trying to make that a much nicer experience than it is today. And then as you kind of zoom into it, what that could be, this zone is where we've lifted this flat iron building off the ground, having retail right on the edge of the street edge. As you walk around it, a small outdoor space for seating and gathering with the trees that are to the behind us in this photograph where the small park is. And then looking lastly at the massing from above, the kind of hotel building at that 150-foot height, creating this kind of flat iron building on the corner, and then the tower pushed to the north, framing that zone, creating these outdoor terraces, and a simple building in the skyline that kind of creates this frame around this entire section of the city. And with that, that's kind of, again, what we want to do more than anything is to show you guys how to take a program, sit it on the site, how to fit it into the city at a conceptual level, at a massing level, and really just to get input early on in the project.
Thank you, David and Kaki. Commissioners, raise your hand, but I'm going to start with Kirk Sykes.
Actually, Mimi, if you don't mind, we have some urban design progress to share. Lizzie, if you could share.
Yeah, I thought that was woven in before. Apologies for.
Okay. Yeah. So prior to the presentation, we give context, and post-presentation, we start to talk to the conversations and issues we've been having with the proponent and the particular challenges that sites produce. And this site, right, is really emblematic of the challenge in a dense urban environment of the relationship between and competition between public realm, transportation, historic preservation, and good urban development and design. The existing fabric, as you can see on the right, is marked by a very limited public realm with very challenging slopes, and also speaks to the sort of contested space of streets and sidewalks, which often limit new opportunities for open space. And as we work on this project and begin to think about it, we're asking how much of the existing urban fabric should be saved as part of this, and what are the opportunities for new public realm in all preservation scenarios. Next slide, please. The proposed project creates additional public realm at the sidewalk level by undercutting the upper levels. And because of the need to change the grade for sea fraud, there is a lot of tricky navigation of grades to get from the lower level to the upper level that Kaki took us through. Additionally, there's a drop-off proposed on Causeway Street that begins to eat into some of this expanded public realm. And we are asking very much, what are the other opportunities to enhance, additional opportunities to enhance the public realm that also maintain the strong urban street wall characteristic of the district? Next slide, please. And as the proponent mentioned, they are early on in the design process and will be conducting a series of additional studies as part of their DPIR filing. And we very much think that these studies are needed to evaluate the relationship of the building to the context and the impact on the public realm, including the urban form, historic resources, environmental factors such as wind and shadow, and of course, open space. Specific studies that we'll be requesting include the tower orientation, the tower and podium orientation, where setbacks may make sense, step backs as well, and providing a clear logic for the tower massing and height within its immediate context and context stretching across the adjoining neighborhoods. We're requesting them to look at alternative schemes that maintain the corner 251 Causeway Street building and or other buildings on the site to see the pros and cons. We're looking for additional views that begin to back up from various vantage points within Bullfinch Triangle and across North Washington Street from the north end. And of course, as part of any DPIR, but really important here, we'll want to understand wind and thermal comfort analyses. And with that, I'll turn it back to the commissioners. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. I see a lot of hands raised, which is great. Looking forward to the comments. If we could just keep them tight and not repeat, that would be helpful in trying to keep our time, which I'm already not hopeful that we're going to stick on to our agenda. But with that, Kirk Sykes.
Great. Well, thank you for a great presentation. I think you did a very good job in the economy of what you described as this sort of slimmed down presentation. So I don't think a lot was lost in your intent. So I want to give you kudos for that. In terms of positive aspects, I think on the ground plane, sort of raising that, brow at the and widening the sidewalk or the extended sidewalk space, I found very positive, as well as the animation of what you call the Flatiron corner, I guess, with how you're treating ground plane with some further pedestrian animation. The one thing I'd encourage you to look at a bit for us is the long views of this structure coming from the north to the south, and in particular over the Zagum Bridge and before, because while you did a good job of describing what occurs within several blocks, I didn't get a sense of how the central artery is framed and what effect this building will have in tandem with the North Station buildings in terms of creating a wicket coming into the city. So I'd love to see some of those longer views. I'm done. Thank you.
David, can we ask you to pull up your presentation? I think some visuals to go along, and commissioners, as I call you, feel free to ask for a particular image, but I'll pass it on to David Hassin.
Thanks, Mimi. Let's see. I'm very startled by the proposal, I will say, in terms of its height and massing. I think that to piggyback on what Kirk said, I think that the work that you've done around the lower portion of the building, the hotel portion of the building, including the public realm and so forth, looks very promising. And I think that that could be, if that was the proposal, the hotel and the public realm around the hotel, I would be very excited to hear more about it. I would, of course, want to understand more about the historic resources that exist on the site. not just their physical nature, but any other significance that they may have relative to the history of the Bullfinch Triangle or relative to the history of Boston itself. Because I have to say, I happened to have been there just the other night, and it also reminded me that with the Strata project across the street and Lovejoy Wharf, that this is becoming a residential neighborhood. So the issue of the shadow and wind that this tower would present on the park that has been built over the over the expressway and the park in front of Lovejoy Wharf and so forth would also be something that very much has to be evaluated, because this building very much looms over those residences, many of which have outdoor space and so forth. Beyond all that, though, I think the part that is, I would like to understand more from the city why we would entertain a building of this height in this location. I struggle with the gateway notion when there is a more dominant urban architectural framework in the form of the Bullfinch Triangle, which already exists and has already been established. And more than that, I think that one of the things that is working, I mean, there's about this district, is the relative transition in heights from the north end to the slightly higher heights that are associated with the Bullfinch Triangle to the tall towers that then are above the garden and basically facing outward from the city. And that was a sort of an urban morphology that in my mind was working and was not isolating a historic district as a kind of like, you know, Disneyland surrounded by towers, but something that was weaving certain districts like the North End and the Bullfinch Triangle together. And so I guess I'll try and be quick, but one of the things about the last 20, 30 years to me about Boston is how successful we've been in trying to weave neighborhoods back together that were torn asunder by urban renewal or other things. And this feels like a building that the tower portion of the building feels like something that is completely negating that effort and feels frankly random to me in its location. So I look forward to more conversation, but my first reaction is skeptical.
Hey, Kaki, for some reason my computer has frozen. Can you show the presentation?
Yeah, I was going to offer if you're
Sure,
having
sure.
trouble, we could
Somehow it
see
just
that aerial that was
Yep,
in
let
Seth,
me,
your presentation with
Yeah.
the, but if you
just,
can
yep,
show your screen, Kaki, that would be
I
great.
don't know. I
And
apologize. Something
no
just froze
problem.
here.
Give me 1 minute.
I'll pass it on to Catherine Morris.
Yes, thank you. I agree with all the commissioners. I can actually see what this will look like from my vantage point driving from 93 over the Zachem Bridge, and it will stick out like an eyesore. It's not going to blend. And to what Commissioner Kim has alluded to is that, you know, neighborhoods, designing neighborhoods and bridging them together. This feels like an outlier, at least the hotel piece of it. So I think it's one, relatively too tall. I think that needs to come down in height. The ground plane is probably more of a major concern for me because Medford Street on a busy day, if there's a Celtics game, something at the city winery, something else happening, people zoom through that street. And it's a heavy concern about the traffic on that side and it being a loading dock and people also trying to figure out ways of parking. So I'm concerned about that side of Medford Street as people are using Medford Street as a pass through to get to Causeway. And then from Causeway, when you're turning onto Washington Street, I'm not sure what that's going to do for transportation in terms of how buses zoom there. and the safety of pedestrians, particularly on that corner, because it is a very short sidewalk, but it does raise concern for me around even the safety and experience of people at that ground plane, given the current design that is being proposed tonight, that I just want you all to consider. And that corner of Medford and Washington, which is, essentially round, where the hotel lobby is at Causeway and Washington, you may want to consider rounding those edges. Just because it's so stark from something that's much more welcoming on the other side versus where the hotel lobby is. Just something to consider when you're thinking about people's experiences and engaging with this building and design. That's all.
Thanks, Catherine. Very helpful comments. I feel very confident this is going to come to subcommittee, but I'm not going to be presumptuous. But if you could direct comments about additional studies you would like to see, I think that could also be helpful. So with that, I'll go to Anne Marie, then Commissioner Ron. Linda Easley's hand is not raised, and then I'll go, function doesn't work, so I'll go to her next, and then Kathy Koterides.
Okay,
Let's start with Anne Marie.
Sorry. Thanks for bringing this to us early. I think this is just the sort of conversation we should be having. I would add that I would like to, when this comes to subcommittee, understand this in respect to the context. I agree with my colleagues. I think this is too tall. It looks out of place. We have, since I've been on the commission, reviewed several projects that fall along the Greenway or this area that are mediating, these difficult sites because of the shape, geometries, but also because they are transition sites between higher buildings and lower historic context. So I'd like to understand, both from the BPD's perspective as well as the designer's perspective, like, how do we as a city address these sites, recognizing that there will be change, but how do we do it in a way that helps to, as Commissioners Kim and Haseen have commented so well, that this is about knitting the city back together, and how do we use these opportunities to create that, to enable that to happen. So it'd be helpful to sort of consider some of the other developments that are happening along this, particularly, I guess, the Greenway corridor, in respect to, mediating these conditions. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Bill Ron?
Yes, thank you. Let's seen this as a gateway project. Of course, let's remember we, in this commission several years ago, dealt with a gateway project in Fenway, which I think has been pretty successful at the near the old Sears building, and more recently with the review of the proposal of the gateway building near Park Drive. So there's, gateway buildings are okay by my standards. Are you able to give us the view of this building in a developed rendering? It's been part of your presentation. Yeah, this one. Okay, so when I first saw this view, I said, this is quite extraordinary, the way this tower comes down to the ground and joins with a low-lying building, and then the hotel at the head of the site. Of course, what I didn't realize was that this tower overlaps the sidewalk in a serious way. And so all of a sudden, a building which felt like it was crisp and very clean in its connection to its lower piece suddenly overlaps both Causeway and Washington Street in such a strong way that you lose what could be an incredibly beautiful composition. So if I were in the petitioner's shoes, I'd be trying to get to that to make the whole composition a much crisper thing. A second is recognizing that the the low-rise portion, the retail, listening to Khaki talk, it's clear that Khaki wishes there were a little more green on the site, I suspect, and certainly the public would. And it's easier to take away the 2 stories of the low-rise piece than other pieces of this building. So I ask that be considered. And as to the composition of the gateway buildings vis-a-vis downtown, I do think the request that several have made that we see what this looks like coming from the north, both from Charlestown and from I-93, would be very valuable before we start making very many judgments. And it raises the question, does downtown, is it because it's a downtown building that we need 40-story building as a gateway building? Why not a 30-story building, for instance? And that gets to David Hassin's really important comments about that, which I won't repeat. So those are my initial reactions to a very nice presentation, but I think there are some serious issues here, David and David Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
And Khaki.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to pass it on to Linda Easley.
Thank you, Mimi. I first wanted to say how excited I am that the city is looking at this site because the current condition is really tough. And I think there's huge opportunity for really reimagining how Causeway hits Washington and how Medford plays that intermediary role as well. And rather than just being defined by, the traffic around it, I think we have an opportunity to really welcome people into our city and this site. So I appreciate you all taking on this challenge and also bringing this to us earlier than maybe you would have felt comfortable bringing it to us. But it's so helpful to kind of understand your thought process and some of the massing things that you all have been playing with. For subcommittee, I had a few comments. The first one is maybe just restating what others have said, but in a different way. My feeling is that this project is about all of the undercuts or the overhangs, depending on how you want to think about it. And I'd really like to understand in subcommittee other designs that you all have explored that don't require you to have this kind of cantilever over the podium. For me, it just feels like it's encroaching on the public realm, even though I understand that by doing it, you're widening the sidewalks in those locations. And, we see it. So if we can go to slide 9. So we see it here at this really important corner. And again, just the idea that the public realm is expressed kind of as a product of this underbelly of the tower. It just feels like it could be a little bit more, and it feels like that building just is larger than the site maybe should be allowing. And then I think if we move to slide 11, just shows another example again about how we're essentially undercutting in order to get that public realm. And could there be opportunities where that building hits the ground in a different way while still creating a generous public realm expression? And then the other piece that hasn't really been talked about today, and this is early days, of course, if we can go to slide 12. And if you can scroll up just a little bit, I wanted to talk about the top. And as you're exploring these with us and exploring it with the planning department, I'd really love to understand your thoughts about the top. For me right now, because you really haven't had a chance to look at that design, I think the top becomes so important. And part of the reason of its importance is that you're going to be seeing it from a really long view. So coming across the bridge in 2 directions, really. And I think to make that landmark statement, there needs to be something really special that happens there. And last, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Pocket Park, and we don't need a slide necessarily to talk. I think that this is a really terrific idea. It is an incredibly busy corner. And I think as you, Kaki and others, begin to explore that, I'd be curious to understand how you might integrate some of the sound mitigation kind of tools into that site to really make it a respite and a haven on that corner. And I think it in its own right becomes a gateway at a different scale when you're coming from the other direction toward the Bullfinch Triangle. And I think actually having that low presence with the hotel and having this kind of green presence could really be as wonderful as having a really strong architectural edge on the other side of the site. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Kathy Kotorides.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and for coming in early. I share some of the reaction to the height and degree to which this creates a corner. I guess I would call it a wall or a sense of walling, and I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. So there are a couple of things I'd like to see in future presentations. I don't remember who exactly said it, but I'd love to see if there are other scenarios that you evaluated for reducing height to some extent and or spreading height around the entire parcel in a different way. And I'd also like to see the views from the north, from the Zakim Bridge and the Russell Bridge, because I think that view might give us a sense of how much that the solidification of that corner of this neighborhood is expressed to drivers from the north or folks from the other side of the harbor. I think it's an important set of views to see. And the other thing I'd love to better understand or see in committee meetings is while we're seeing forms here of all of the other adjacencies, I'd love to see street views of how this building fits into the views of the Bullfinch Triangle, down Causeway, down Washington, with some of the texture of the neighborhood around it, so that we understand both context, materials, but also just a better sense of how this building fits within the current context and sense of the neighborhood's materiality. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Jonathan Evans.
Thank you. Again, it's really helpful to sort of see this early and sort of elevate kind of some red flags, which I think we're seeing. I agree with a lot of what's been said, specifically with what Bill and Linda have offered. I guess, can you go to the slide that showed the sort of massing generation diagrams? I think these are helpful, and I think for me, right there. I guess as we go into future subcommittee meetings, I think similar to what Kathy just said, I think understanding what else has been considered to kind of get to this. What are some of the rules for why is the tower oriented that way and sort of not perhaps north-south direction? Just basically understanding what is the bigger organizing idea. I mean, I kind of get some of the impetus to sort of fit in with the sort of the fabric with sort of the mid-rise and then stepping up. But again, I'd love to understand a little bit more, sort of see some more about what else has been considered to how to put these pieces together, just to better understand one, again, to maybe David's points, fit and contextuality and sort of appropriateness, but also a clearer understanding from your end about what is your design kind of goal, or what is the objective, what you're trying to accomplish here, and beyond just the idea of a gateway, which can mean a lot of different things. So yeah, I'll leave it there without kind of repeating what else has been said, but it's exciting to sort of see this and look forward to more conversations in subcommittee.
Thanks, Jonathan. David Manfredi.
Yeah, very briefly, there's an awful lot to think about and talk about here. First of all, I do really appreciate your coming in early and seeing your, I guess, not first, but early thoughts. And obviously you have put a good deal of thought into this. Um, it's a gateway, I guess, to the city. It's also in the middle in so many ways. It's wrapped on one side, on almost half of the circumference by Lovejoy Wharf and the North End and Bullfinch, and relevant to all the things that David talked about. But on the others, and then the other 180 degrees is North Station and the West End and Government Center and the new old Government Center and new Government Center. It's quite remarkable when you put it in that bigger context. And I guess as a threshold conversation, I would really want you to pursue the important considerations of urban design here in terms of context and connectivity, and in its historical context, its current and the future of the city, and even relative to the Greenway. And then secondly, very briefly, I like Jonathan. I like this. This is probably my favorite slide in your presentation, which was very good. And I get stuck on the third from the left and say, geez, what if that triangle, that there was a lot more green, that there was a triangle of green that kind of cut into this site and did something very special there in the public realm. Anybody who's ever turned that corner from Washington onto Causeway Street on a game night knows that you do that with great peril. It is an acute corner. It's very narrow on both sides. I agree with what Linda said about wider sidewalks are nice, but more space is maybe better, or could be really better and really special here. So thank you. It's a very nice, it's a very good presentation. It's very thoughtful, which just leaves us a lot to think about.
Thank you, David. Laura Solano.
Thank you for the presentation, and you're smart to have come to the committee so early. I just wanted to, a lot has been said that I think is very valuable. One thing that Kathy said is the proportion of the lower to the higher building, I think could use a little more exploration. But I do appreciate kind of the movement. The triangular sites are really tough, but I appreciate the kind of movement that you're getting out of the building by these various orientations to the city. And I'm going to advocate, of course, for the landscape as well. I think that there's some missed opportunities, and frankly, when you have this scale of building, there ought to be a lot more give back to the public realm. I think there's an opportunity to do that, and I would like to understand sort of where adjacent green spaces are. So that's more of a diagram in the next presentation that shows what those opportunities are. And then if you could go back to slide 12. And I saw the Boston Planning's list of perspectives that they wanted from the ground plan. It seems to me like there's this missed opportunity to connect the site to the water. I mean, the building is raised because of the water, and it seems like an afterthought. And water is, one of the most wonderful things about Boston. It's torturing us now, but it is something wonderful on a day-to-day basis. And I think you need to take in the green space, or public realm, you need to take advantage of that view. It's an afterthought in this condition. And of course, we need to see all the way around the building of what's happening in the public realm. So trying to see if there's anything else. Oh, adjacencies in terms of sort of the rhythms of the buildings. And I guess that will develop as you're developing the views that the city has asked you to study. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. And I'm going to pass it on to Diana. And I did put a public comment that was really deliberate. It was for staff. We are running, far along in our agenda. And so we're trying to wrap it up here.
Appreciate it, Mimi. I think I'll try to be brief here. I think I just wanted to take a moment to be able to share with the commission and to respond specifically to David and Anne Marie's comments around, where is the planning department on height with this particular project. As you know, everyone has a right to submit any project, and we have the ability to review it. As was stated on the earlier part of this presentation, we are bringing this very early to the commission as we formulate our scoping determination and look at what is appropriate here from height, from a conceptual standpoint, from a public realm standpoint. We wanted to bring this to the commission at this stage in order to integrate your feedback as we continue to shape and work with this development team to identify what is appropriate on the site. So I want to make sure the commission and the commissioners walk away with that understanding that this is at a very early stage. We have yet to scope the project. We're in the midst of doing that as we speak. And the goal here was to hear your feedback and integrate that as we work with this project team to develop what is appropriate and how we can stitch this together. And I know, Amy Chambers, if you want to add some additional comments, I think the zoning context here is also very important to consider.
For sure. And I will also be brief. I just wanted to note, and I appreciate it being raised again, that staff have included, some of the premises that exist in the zoning with respect to design guidelines. This is a bit of a unique situation insofar as there are really kind of detailed recommendations that live in the zoning with respect to design. And certainly, I know that there has been a substantial amount of dialogue over, the course of time at this point, both with residents in the area and with others around the applicability of the zoning writ large, but acknowledging kind of the intention behind it, acknowledging the reason for those design guidelines that being included in it. We want to make sure that this commission has the opportunity to really kind of familiarize themselves with those and to be able to, just help us kind of think through how to best apply them. So.
And I'll just chime in. I'm happy to follow Amy because that's what I've been thinking all along. I really was struck by that slide that said zoning, section 46, 8.1, and there was like 3 things that were immediately called out: the demolition of the existing building. I just wrote a couple, thinking about the historic context, aligning with cornices, setback at 65 feet on Causeway. There was a lot of good context there that I don't see this proposal acknowledging any of those guidance. I know it's guidance from many decades ago, but it's still relevant. And maybe there are some strategies that you have used in this design, but I think that's what I'm asking you to come back to subcommittee with. Give us an urban design framework that ties it back to some of these guidelines in the zoning regulations so we can even understand decisions that have been made.
Mimi, could I just add that to what you said, which I agree with 100%, but the fact that the guidelines are old does not mean that they're bad or wrong.
Exactly.
So I would like to, that seemed to be coming through that, the guidelines were done a long time ago. Well, I would like to understand the guidelines better. And if the guidelines are not reflective of what we think should be happening in the future, then I'd like to hear from the city or others why, so that we can evaluate that in that context.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
a great point. I think with that, Christina, we're ready to see if there's public testimony, and I believe we have a patient, Paul Pellaviano, who's been having his hand raised for some time.
Excellent. Well, we'll start with Paul. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Paul Pettavolano. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. When this began, somebody who did the first part of the presentation said the development has to be something like traditionally scaled and contextual to the area. I think when you look at this development and the perspective of the pictures make it look like it fits right in with North Station and some of the buildings that are further. But when you're down on the street, you feel like you're in an extension of the North End where the buildings are much more modest scale. I should say, to be fair, I live at 234 Causeway, but on the other hand, I'm facing exactly on the other side of the building. So I am not looking at the new tower that would go in where a lot of the people on the other side of the building will feel it most acutely. So the only thing I would say is it doesn't, one of the things I loved is I can come out of my building and feel like I'm in a North End extension of homogeneous buildings. The towers that exist are built over the expressway and on the water and kind of frame the area. This building and tower would seem more appropriate where I live, where you're abutting the new bridge and you're abutting the water and continue the frame. But this is like in the living space, and it just feels very different and very foreboding. We are recently moved here, and one of the things, we thought, oh, we might like to live in the seaport, but it became too cold and too many high-rise buildings, and it felt like you were living in downtown Manhattan. So that's it.
Thank you, Paul. Can we have Christine? Christine, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. So I too live at the Strata building at 234 Causeway, and I do face south. And so my residence, which is on the 10th floor, would be viewing the wall or curtain of the tower. So I would ask from a design perspective that this group certainly take into account the comments that many of the commissioners have made with regard to height. Also, I understand that wind studies will be requested, and I would ask that those be conducted not only at the ground level, but also further up. Our building has been impacted by some of the other buildings that have gone on the north side of Causeway. I have a significant amount of outdoor space on the 10th floor, and we have many residents who have outdoor space on the 7th and 10th floors. And I think the building would like to preserve the ability to have communal outdoor space at the roof line, which is above the 12th floor. And so adding a building, of anything approaching the height that this project is talking about may have significant wind impacts to existing residents in a way that you may not be thinking about initially. I think we would also, I would echo the comments that Paul made just about feeling like we are sort of the transition from the Wolfench Triangle to the North End. We sit right at the corner. We're also at an intersection that has been listed as one of the most dangerous in the city of Boston, if not the state of Massachusetts. And so I think having a drop off on Causeway Street that is going to cause additional backups is something from a design perspective we would hope this group would weigh in significantly on. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Susan McCarthy, are you able to unmute yourself? Oh, sorry, 1 second while we elevate you. Go ahead, Susan. Susan, are you able to unmute yourself? We cannot hear you if you're talking. Susan, my apologies. It appears we're having some technical difficulty hearing you. I'm happy to return to you if you'd like to rejoin the meeting or if you'd like to call in by phone to offer your testimony. Okay. Commissioners, at this time I see no additional hands raised. We're going to try to follow up with Susan to see if we can get the issue resolved. We'll take testimony.
And Christina, if I might suggest, if we're not able to hear Susan tonight, that she could email and we can make sure that the comments get distributed to the commission.
Yes, Susan, I'm happy to put our email address in the chat right now so we can follow up with you. Commissioners, we will call the public testimony of this portion of the presentation closed.
All right, so commissioners, we need to come up with a next steps or a motion.
Mimi, I would suggest, I think one of the ideas for having projects come to us earlier is a really good one. And I also think that it might suggest that the proponent team takes some of the comments from today and works with the planning department, for a substantial amount of time. I don't know if that's weeks or months, before they come back to us for subcommittees. So I would make a motion that might happen, that we would send this to subcommittee, but with enough time for the planning department to work through some of these comments with the proponent team before they come back to us.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Christina, is that motion good to vote on? I assume it is.
Yes.
All right, and I'll call on all commissioners. So I see on my screen, Kathy Kotorides.
Yes.
Laura Solano.
Yes.
David Manfredi.
Yes.
Jonathan Evans.
Yes.
Bill Ron.
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Yes.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
David Hassin. I don't think David, can you weigh in one more time?
I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you. Kirk Sykes.
Yes.
Linda Easley.
Yes.
McYoung Kim. And myself, Mimi Love, yes. So after some time with the planning department, we look forward to seeing you in subcommittee. And with that, I think we can move on to the next new project that we'll be reviewing. This is in South Boston and 181 West 1st Street.
All right, we'll pass it over to Amy for planning context if you want to advance the slide, Lizzie.
Perfect. So Commissioners, 181 West 1st Street, as mentioned in South Boston, is a notice of project change. The project was originally approved in 2014. This particular NPC contemplates increasing the proposed height and density of the project. The change from a 3- and 4-story building to a 4- and 6-story building would result in a net increase of dwelling units from 97 to 149. Next slide, please. So the proposed multifamily residential use is permitted within the MFR, that's multifamily residential zoning subdistrict. The 2011 Planning and Rezoning Initiative for West 1st Street codified in Article 68 envisioned a residential context to the west of the corridor and a more industrial fabric to the east, closer to the waterfront. When the zoning was adopted, it was presumed that properties along the reserve channel would continue to be characterized by industrial and surface parking uses in the long term. Subsequent years have seen an evolution of these uses in the neighborhood, including the addition of residential uses in the immediate adjacent area. The South Boston Transportation Action Plan, which is a ongoing project, hopefully soon to be wrapped up, will evaluate safety concerns in South Boston and focus the city's resources on proven strategies and people-first improvements to eliminate serious and fatal traffic crashes. The goal of SBTAP, as it is called, is to build upon the vision and goals set forth in Imagine Boston 2030 and highlighted further in Go Boston 2030. Through improvements to the surrounding streetscape and abutting sidewalks, this project will help to reinforce the goals outlined by said plan. Next slide, please.
So the site is part of the evolving corridor of urban fabric between West 2nd and West 1st Streets, between South Boston's traditional residential fabric and the fabric to the northeast, which today remains mostly low-density industrial uses, but is evolving into a mix of higher density industrial, commercial, lab, residential, and hospitality uses. The corridor has seen significant new residential growth in recent years. Larger projects include the completed West Square and West Side Crossing projects, and the recently approved projects at 270 West 1st and 295 West 1st Street, located 2 blocks to the southeast. You may remember that 295 West 1st Street was recently reviewed and approved by this commission and the BPDA board. A life science project has been approved immediately across 1st Street from the site, and a hotel project was approved just beyond that. Next slide, please.
So while the proposed project exceeds zoning dimensional maximums, planning and urban design staff worked to refine building massing that is contextually consistent with the ongoing evolution of West 2nd and West 1st Streets. These changes include a 6-story setback that comes out of the discussion with the community, which helps to bring the project closer to the scale already present in the area. Staff review also focused on improvements to the surrounding public realm, including new widened sidewalks, upgraded street intersections for enhanced pedestrian safety, and the protection and addition of street trees to create a robust canopy around the site perimeter. Next slide, please.
Hello, I am Peter Zagorianakis, and I am the proponent of the project. And I'm here with my team, and I will be speaking, and Ron Bennett, our architect, will be speaking. I'm going to share our deck. Thank you all for having us. Just make sure we can all see. Can we see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
So this project was originally approved in 2014. At that time, new zoning in the area had just been introduced 2 years earlier. The transition along West 1st Street and West 2nd Street, which is considered to be the transition zone between South Boston and the Seaport. At that time, we permitted an as-of-right building for 97 units. And since we did it as of right, we had no affordable component, and we didn't have as much infrastructure improvements as most of the projects today have. In order to implement affordable units and more infrastructure improvements, we've decided to come back for a taller project. We were 3 stories on 2nd Street. We are now 4 stories on 2nd Street, and we are 6 stories on 1st Street. Where we were 4 stories on 1st Street. We have increased the FAR from 2.0 to 3.0. The unit increased from 97 to 148. The affordable units went up from none to 20 units. This project is passive house certifiable. We're doing a project of 127 units at the corner of 8th Street and 1st and 2nd, down 5 blocks down the street, which is passive house certified right now. As the BPDA had mentioned, this is a transition zone. Across from us on 2nd Street are mostly 3- and 4-story residential buildings. And then you have the West Square building, which is a 4.5-story building that was built approximately 10 years ago. And that takes up the entire block. The Signal building is on the same side of the street as we are. I own that building and did that about 15 years ago. And then we have two commercial projects that have been permitted right along C Street behind us as you approach the convention center. One's a biotech building and one's a hotel. Both of those buildings are proposed to be 75 feet. We also have the Mahoney Park, which is a very important element of the neighborhood right next to us. And so we've considered the different elements and the stakeholders in the area. We've met with the neighbors multiple times, the BPDA multiple times, and this is what the project has evolved. And we think we've got a very nice project here. So the first change that we made in the project is this single corridor element of the building was set back 59 feet from 2nd Street. Originally, that was right up to the street. And we did that to create a pocket park here, which does several things for us. It helps us create more air and window lines to this three-story structure that's in the middle of our site. We're a U-shaped site. Additionally, it allows us to integrate and become integrated with the park. Even though we're private, we're using the same species of trees and bushes, and we've used the same shape of walkway, and we're removing the fence that's along the two properties back about 50 feet. And that helps integrate the two pieces together so that they almost look like one, even though they're separated properties. We've also graded with the park, so now our grades follow the park's grades along the park edge. And again, as was mentioned, all the streets have been increased to meet the requirements of the city so that the public realm around the building will be much wider with trees completely surrounding the building and a blue bike station along First Street. We've also created a little dog relief area on First Street to allow some of the dogs, instead of going in the park, they can go in the relief area. This is a little blow up of that intersection of our pocket park with the park next door. And this is the fence we removed. Grades are the same. The contextual shape of the walkways are similar, and all the species are similar. Couple of pictures of the park itself. This is the fence that's being removed. This actually happens to be where the transformers in the park are. But all of this grading will actually grade nicely between the two properties.
I just want to flag with the proponent team that you've reached the halfway point of the allotted presentation time.
Thank you. This is our streetscape along 2nd Street, where we've tried to meet the corner slides of the buildings that are next to us. We have West Square to the right of us on 2nd Street, and our 4th-story cornice line is meeting the cornice line of West Square. Our 3rd-floor cornice line is meeting the cornice line of the 3-story residential building in the middle of us, and that they also meet the Signal buildings cornice lines further down the street. Along C Street, we have the cornice line across from us, which is a 4-story residential building. We're slightly higher on our 4 stories, and then we're transitioning up. Our 5th story is set back 29 feet to limit visibility from 2nd Street, and that transitions up to a proposed building on Commercial Street, which is 75 feet. We're at approximately 63.5 feet high. Along the park side, what we've done is on our 5th or 6th story, depending on which elevation you're looking at it from, we've set this back 10 feet to eliminate that story from shading on the park itself because of the plants on the park. And if this is our First Street elevation, I am going to turn it over to my architect, Ron Bennett, at this time.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for your time. This is our entry facade on First Street, looking toward approved larger projects to the north. It's in a scale and character that anticipates that future higher density development along West First Street. We've got a strong central entry element, retail spaces at ground level, albeit with raised sill heights that reflect current climate resiliency requirements. There are many balconies, including those set into the corners of the building. Next slide, please. We are presenting a simpler facade on West 2nd Street compared to what was approved in 2014. We eliminated the corner balconies, and in fact, we've eliminated all balconies facing West 2nd Street in response to our neighbors' concerns about balconies and roof decks facing that direction. This new design has fewer overhangs with a simpler penthouse level for a lighter profile against the sky. Because we'll pursue passive house certification, we've reduced the glass ratio to about 13% of the facade area with European style tilt-turn windows. Next slide, please. Fairly traditional materials palette specified for long-term durability and minimal maintenance. Red brick, metal panels in 2 shades of gray, and touches of cement panels here and there surrounding the balconies. Next slide, please. We've articulated the facade with pairs of vertical bays around all sides of the building and balconies in the corners and roof setbacks on all sides except West 2nd Street. Next slide, please. You'll see them here. This is the corner balconies facing this on the corner of C and First. We also have balconies above our bays on C Street and also on the roof setbacks in front of the penthouse. Next slide, please. On the east side of the building, Peter already mentioned that we pushed the building back 59 feet from the street to create a park. We've also set back the penthouse level to reduce shading on the park next door. And we've got some trees that are already growing in the park that will provide a nice screen between the park and the lower portions of our building. Next slide, please. Again, this is the back to the north side of the building, showing our retail level and a contrasting brick entry at the center. And pretty much all the palette of materials and different articulation that we've used around the building, it's sort of all here in this one view. I think we're done.
Thank you, everybody.
Seth, are we going to get follow-up comments?
Yes, Lizzie, you could share the screen. So we've been working with the proponent and focusing very much on the public realm and are very much in support of the creation of publicly accessible on-site open space. And with the increased height and density over the original scheme, we'd like to see if there's a possibility of creating even more open space. The design and programming relationship of the existing open space, of the new open space to the existing open space should be enhanced. The proponent talked about some of the challenges inherent in that, including grades, planting, transformers, but we want to continue to explore that, enhancing that relationship with them. We also need to better understand the relationship between the tenant amenity space in the courtyard and the adjacent parcel. Next slide, please. We very much appreciate the intent to break down the scale and of the building both horizontally and vertically, as well as aligning step backs and key datums to the height of existing context, particularly setback on the upper level facing, this should say West 2nd Street. However, we think we need greater clarity on the massing logic of the overall composition with a clear hierarchy of primary, secondary, and tertiary massing elements, and align articulation strategies with the massing strategies. And also focus very much on how the building meets the ground on each of the different frontages and unique sidewalks. And with that, we'll turn it to the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Commissioners, comments? Maybe we can have the proponent team pull up the presentation. Maybe we start with the site plan, and then we'll pass it on to David Hassin.
Okay, I mean, I'm happy to kick it off. I think that I think the proponents are correct, and planning is correct in sort of identifying this area as an area that is a transitional area that could take more height and massing than the previous proposal did. And in that respect, I think that the larger program, the introduction of affordable housing and so forth is all very positive. And I think that the pulling back of the massing of the single loaded U to create more space does provide a more gracious entrance to Mahoney Park. And I think that some of the things that were mentioned there by Peter make a lot of sense as well. And I do think that it helps certainly with the snuggle that the building basically creates around the existing three-story residential. When the proponent, I think that Seth's comments were all very on point. When the proponent comes back to subcommittee, I would like to have a chance to understand the evolution of the design from what was originally approved, maybe with some notes about what was said at that meeting that got us to that point, to the existing design, so that we, have some baseline for talking about how the facades might benefit from some further development, or might meet some of the goals that Seth was talking about as sort of a hierarchy of detail. For me right now, the overall strategy of the facade seems thoughtful, but there was a dynamic and a sense of energy and detail to the original proposal, which I understand was a very different proposal to what we see here. And so I think that would be to have an opportunity to talk about the materials and the facade compositions in more detail would be something I would look forward to doing in subcommittee. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jonathan Evans?
Thank you. That I agree with all of that, and specifically looking at the sort of architecture, I think the overall kind of massing the U shape makes a lot of sense. I think the added bulk makes sense for the site. I guess I'd love to have you explore a little bit more. There's a lot of kind of secondary moves in the massing, these sort of open corners, balconies that are kind of half in, half out, bay projections, things like that, which I think are all smart architectural strategies. I guess what I'm wondering is if that can better align with the language of some of the material choices you have in terms of the brick, the metal, the siding. I think right now there's kind of two separate languages that aren't necessarily aligning. So I hate to say simplify, but I do think there could be some opportunity to better kind of connect why and where you have material transitions relative to some of the building design moves you're doing. And I appreciated the kind of comment earlier in the presentation around locking in the sort of height of key moments to other buildings in the context. And I also wonder if that's an opportunity to think about if there's an existing sort of window proportion or dimension of a bay or something else that can help maybe create more of a synergy or more of a kind of connection to the scales of elements in the neighborhood. But I think overall the massing is sound. I think a lot of the scale makes sense to me. I don't want to contradict David, but I think this could also be read as a building in its own right, of its own merit, not necessarily tied to what was done before. So I would maybe defer to you to what extent it's worth going back, or if this is a whole new project and we should look at it accordingly. And if so, let's I guess present a little bit more about again some of these other sort of design moves that are helping to get you to where you are now. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and I don't disagree, Jonathan. That's fine.
Yeah.
David Manfredi?
Very quickly, I think planning department's comments Seth's comments were excellent. Be interested to learn more about how the building meets the ground, can accommodate retail, and at the same time accommodate the resiliency requirements here. I don't really understand how it's working right now, but I totally support the goals. And I would say the same about the top of the building. Feels very much like it is not fully integrated. It's interesting to me though, and I agree with Jonathan. Let's go forward and not backwards. But when I see before and after, there's parts of after in fenestration and the handling of materials that I actually like better, in that they do treat the building wall as a wall in which there are punched windows in an order that sort of makes sense to me, and not try to create this hierarchy of small windows framed by big openings to pretend that everything's bigger than it is. But I think what David was getting at was, and Jonathan both getting at, was simplicity is good in this context, and it can be more simple. I'm not sure it needs to be two materials. I'm not sure that it's not, it wouldn't be stronger or at least doesn't need to be two equal amounts of materials. It might be stronger as brick, and maybe two bricks, two different bricks and two different textures or colors, or in a way that, but be honest to the masonry openings. I think that's better contextually. I think you don't have to play the game of trying to frame bigger openings to make the punches look bigger. There's some good things happening here, and I support the urge to focus and simplify. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm going to call on Linda. I know her hands function's not working, and she chimed in by text. So Linda.
Thank you, Mimi. I was gesturing, but it's hard to see. So I wanted to step back a minute and think about some of the kind of urban design ideas that this proponent team is putting forward. And in subcommittee, what I would like to understand a little bit better is the relationship of this building to 186, and also the relationship of this building to the Mahoney Park, which I assume is a public park. Is that right? So the proponent owns 154 and owns 181, but not the park in the middle. Okay.
Yep.
So I would just like to understand the relationship of that better. I am still struggling with the northern arm of this building that wraps around 186. I'd like to understand I'd like to see maybe some other options that have been explored, particularly that look at this building maybe having been a J in the past, rather than almost coming to full closure around 186. And I'm curious about that because I'm concerned about the distance between 181 and 186 on those two sides especially. And so maybe having some perspectives that help us to understand what those dimensions are. And also if you could bring some photographs, or within your perspective renderings, actually share with us what the facades of 184 look like. I know it was just shown as a kind of a gray mass, and so it's hard to understand what's happening with that building. So my questions are about the urban design relationship to the buildings around it, and particularly to kind of the hole in the donut there, which is 184. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Anne Marie? I think you're on mute still. You having trouble unmuting? Oh, there you go.
I got it. Yes, sorry, having a little technology issue. When this comes to design subcommittee, I would like to see more of this building in context within the surrounding neighborhood. That this, not unlike, very different conditions, but not unlike the previous project, this building is mediating, a transitional spot, a transition in scale, a transition in use between different districts, different adjoining districts. I agree with my colleagues that I think the height is fine, but the way it is currently represented to us, we're really seeing it in isolation with the exception of the massing. So I'd like to understand how this building contributes to Commissioner Kim's comment earlier to, kind of creating a neighborhood. How do we, I think that's a really important role. We'd just like to understand the decisions that are made. And I think that's where I think Commissioner Evans made the comment about I'd like to better understand the kind of the architectural rhythm, fenestrations of adjoining buildings, surrounding buildings, and how the new design, and I do think we should approach this as a new design, respond to those conditions and create something wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Laura Solano.
I will second Anne Marie's ask for context, especially related to materials. I'm having a hard time understanding how this building fits in materially within the neighborhood. The other thing that strikes me is that there's a sameness on each of the facades, and I wonder whether or not there's the opportunity for that to be a little more lively, I guess, and maybe even responsive to the adjacent buildings. I also would like to understand more about how entrances work in the building and the garage entrance as well, how that fits in. I think the Boston Planning Department certainly has asked a good question about open space. Do we need more? Is this the right place for it? And if there were other iterations of that, I would love to see them. I deeply appreciate kind of respecting Mahoney Park and trying to actually thicken it at the edge of the sidewalk. But I wonder if there are other opportunities around the building. And I'd also like to understand how the middle courtyard works. I'm not sure about accessibility or what its relationship is to 186. I don't know if it's raised at grade. So a little more clarity about that. And I think the other commissioners have made really great comments. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Laura. Kathy Coderitas.
Yes, thank you. My fellow commissioners have made great comments that I generally agree with. And just to put a finer point on what Laura just said, I'd like to understand more about the circulation and flow of the public areas and people to and from and through these areas. The reference to retail leaves me wondering, what is the pedestrian traffic here, given the transitional context that the team has hinted at, just so that we understand what not just the climate related matters of design, but also the likelihood of the spaces being utilized adequately and what the relationship to pedestrian flow would actually be. And the only other question I have might be for the planning staff, and that is, I was wondering about the percentage of affordable housing in this particular proposal, and whether it seemed lower than what I understand the current ordinances, or rather the requirements of the city to be. And I just wonder if that's tied to the older proposal, or do I have the percentages wrong?
I might actually defer to the project proponent to describe the affordability strategy.
The affordable strategy is tied to the former project. There's, in the end, the BPDA can correct me on this, but there's two ways of looking at the affordable component. This is falling under the old ordinance, not the new ordinance that was just passed in October.
I'd love to hear more about what about that in relation to old and new, given the substantial increase in size. And that is obviously not a public realm matter, but it seems to me to be something that is important to the larger community.
Thank you, Kathy. Kirk Sykes, and then
Yeah.
we'll go to Mick Young.
Great. I think there's evolved quite a few of these transitional new infill buildings in and around this district. And it'd be great for you to assemble some of the typologies that you think kind of have been successful and maybe show us how this begins to either emulate some of those or in terms of materiality and projections and, you know, manipulation of the facade. So it just might be helpful to understand what's worked in similar scale buildings in this neighborhood when you come back to committee.
Thank you, Kirk. Mick Young?
Just something quick. I think as you come back to committee, the question is the green space big enough or is it too small? I think what would be helpful is if you kind of took the green space holistically and kind of provided to the commissioners a programming diagram, since this project has changed in terms of who's using it and how it's being used. The discussions about connectivity is important, but I'm struggling to understand like where it says 22 or 21. It looks like there's a fence between them. And part of me just wonders, do you want to just do the opposite? Is create a secret garden here? Because the streetscape is fine here, but nothing to write home about. And then the second thing, so I'd love to get, I don't think size should matter, should have an idea of what that landscape wants to be and what it's servicing for this constituency. The second thing is, I think your renderings don't show any trees. They show planters with like shrubs or something like that, but your plan shows street trees. And so if you could just kind of give us a sense, I understand you're probably showing the facade of the building, like with and without trees, because I think this is another aspect of creating a kind of pedestrian neighborhood is to create a generous streetscape experience. And so I would love to have a better sense of that and to really kind of create a precinct with that. So simple stuff like programming diagram for the landscape and maybe some sections in the relationship of the building wall all the way across each of like one through West First Street, one through West Second Street,
Yep.
and through C Street. It would be so helpful just to understand the scale of what we're talking about. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mick Young. Laura Solano?
Just a quick comment. I can't remember if anyone else asked for this, but sunshade diagrams would be, I think, really important as well.
All right. I think there are a lot of comments that I just want to reiterate, but I am really, the one I'm going to repeat is the massing diagram that wraps itself around the 186. I just would love to understand if there's, given the height, which I think is appropriate that you're asking for of the neighborhood, is there a way to eliminate that wing that wraps around 186? I also just am curious if there's an attitude about how you are thinking about being a good neighbor to Mahoney Memorial Park. That's a really unique through block park condition. And I'm not seeing an attitude at all in the new landscape. If you're trying to feel like an extension of that park, or what is the relationship between that really important park and your project? The one thing that I want to really look at in subcommittee is the elevation on West First Street. I think that's the one that I'm struggling with the most. But what is developing on West First Street is problematic in that the ground floor retail spaces are not high enough. And I think setting the height of the retail to be successful for future, use as really active retail space is an important element. They cannot have low ceilings because if they have low ceilings, they tend to be empty spaces. So I'm very curious about the height of the first floor podium. And then I would just reiterate the landscape. If you could bring a landscape architect that you're working with to the commission to talk about their attitude around
yeah.
even the streetscape, I think that would be helpful.
Maybe that's, I didn't realize you guys should get a landscape architect if you
No,
don't
we
have
have
one,
one.
please. Okay, great.
All right. I think with that, any commissioner additional comments? So not seeing any additional hands or gestures, I will pass it on to Christina for public comment.
Commissioners, at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Valerie Burns, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. And thank you so much to the commissioners for staying to us at the end of the meeting. I so appreciate it. I'm a community gardener. In this garden, I was on the waiting list for 3 years before I got we got a plot. A little bit about Mahoney Park. Mahoney Park wasn't here in 2014 when the As of Right building was designed. The community's been working really hard to create a park in a neighborhood that's really underserved. And so what happened was an underused city maintenance yard that was phasing out was combined with community mitigation from the CRISPR building, which isn't too far from here. And those two things together made a community park. Warner Lawson was hired. We did community process. And surprisingly, what the community wanted was a community garden. So at least half of this garden grows food. And as a result, what we need is sun. And we need especially sun to the east because the site slopes and there's an existing building to the west. And so what we are really concerned about, it's too bad in the photographs that the proponent showed, they didn't choose to show the community garden. There's 22 plots full of food, waiting list. We need some real consideration in terms of the shaping of this larger building because we need sun. We also have some terrific trees in the garden. It's the garden is only about 5 years old. The park was finished about 5 years ago. There's some beautiful trees. We have birches, we have yellow magnolias, we have dogwoods. They need sun. And so I just, as you look at this in committee, I would really like to encourage you to think about Mahoney Park, how important it is to the neighborhood. It's a small park, but it's mighty and it's treasured. So I'm delighted to see you going into committee with this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valerie. Matt Jones, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to the committee for all the thoughtful comments so far. I'm a member of the Impact Advisory Group for this project, and I just also live on this street a few blocks down. So I wanted to provide a little bit of additional context as had been asked for, because this is one of our neighborhood is in the adolescent stages of a really profound change right at this threshold, right between West 2nd and West 1st Streets, right where this project is. And so I really want to emphasize the need to sort of keep up the standards with each new project that comes along, because it's going to be one in a continuing line of projects that are really going to transform our neighborhood. And immediately adjacent to this site There are some really good buildings and some really bad buildings. There's the Signal Lofts, which is owned by the proponent, which is a really handsome historic building of brick, and there's the Spice Lofts nearby. And then right on the other side is West Square, which I think it'd be fair to say is not a good example. It's a really cheap looking building with using cheap materials on its facades. And then to the south, is the residential, which is really 3 stories, in some cases 2-story buildings, so really small scale. And then, as it's been pointed out, to the north, we have these big new projects coming in, including a hotel. So this is all one more step in a pretty profound transformation. So I wanted to make a comment to really hopefully emphasize the need to have this be really sensitive to where it is and keep up a really good aesthetic standard as to what it could be. I think when I look at the renderings and the elevations that are shown here in this presentation, I think what I see, it's frankly really unsatisfactory. And when the architect was presenting and said something about it being a passive house, maybe that's part of it. Maybe the fenestration is too small and there's too many blank spaces. Maybe the materials are too complicated, but I'd really like to emphasize the need and ask for the committee to really take a look at how these facades are assembled and put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Brent, are you able to unmute yourself? Brent Leschak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the commissioners for allowing us to provide our comments in here. I've been attending the various developments of this this project, and in talking to our neighbors, I am in a butter directly across from the unit on West 2nd. We're part of the residential condo units right across from this new development, and we're very concerned with the zoning, the variance on the 40-foot height limit. All the latest builds have been complying with that, and with the aesthetic of the neighborhood, we feel that that's something that should be adhered to. There was a lot of careful consideration by the Boston Planning and Development Agency prior to its renaming that included extensive public comments and participation, and culminated in developing that 40-foot height limit for this area of South Boston. And I think the rationale that was contemplated at that time is still valid today, and really should be adhered to. And it's really inequitable to the other property owners here who have built recently and have made this area their home to be providing these large variances, without voting or that just through commission. Furthermore, when this was done back in 2014, and you look at the sizing and massing of that building, that much more fit into the aesthetic of what's currently here. Specifically, if you look in between the blocks of C and B Street along West 2nd. And in fact, when you actually will look at the renderings and see what the latest construction, which is the 186 West 2nd Street, it's going to be absolutely dwarfed by the size and scale and massing of this current project being proposed. The other thing that isn't really discussed in making this a neighborhood is understanding with a lot of the large developments that are going on in the area, the negative impacts to both vehicular, pedestrian traffic in the area. We are already seeing large amounts of traffic backups on West 2nd now, going across the South Boston Bypass Road. And West 1st and West 2nd actually come together at B Street. And there are huge traffic volumes there now, and this is only going to make that worse. And I'll wrap it up with one last thing. There are solar panels being put up as proposed on the top of this building. And we have been asking it from the community to have a reflective study done to see the impacts to the surrounding residents, because the orientation of the panels have the potential to have severe glare, and we have not been able to see those reflective studies. There's also been discussions of putting parapets up to mitigate that, but we haven't seen those renderings along with studies to see if the parapets would actually be something that would work,
Brent,
or what would go on there. So I'll wrap up my comments with that.
Great. And we certainly appreciate the detail of the comments. We are happy to receive any detailed comments submitted via writing to bcdc@boston.gov to give commissioners the fullness of time to review. But appreciate you coming tonight to provide in-person testimony. John,
so quick question, how do we send those?
I'll put some information in the chat, but the email address is bcdc@boston.gov. And we are
Roger that.
happy
Thank
to
you.
forward any of those comments on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Good
Great.
evening, everyone. My name is John Pikatowski, lifelong resident, small business owner in South Boston, IAG member on this project. I second Kathy Carteritis's comments on a review should be necessary to bring this project up to the 17% affordables that was approved in October. My second point, on West 2nd Street, 184, 188, how will those people in those buildings interact with your Pocket Park green space area in the tie-in to Mahoney Park? Again, this project is a complete change. It's more than just a project notification. I mean, just from, the newly changed sea fraud levels mapping, your base elevations. I applaud you for putting the fortuitous into it and thinking ahead at getting the ground plane level with your neighboring properties. One of my pet peeves is having the transformer, pad mounted transformer and switch right in the front. Is there a way to push that back into the green space area further hidden away per se? That's just my pet peeve. May not be shared with by anyone else. But thank you, BCDC Commission and Planning Department for bringing this forward early on.
Thank you, John.
Christina, is it okay if I chime in on the affordability piece?
Absolutely.
So commissioners, we were just checking kind of in the background. The project is not subject to the inclusionary zoning because it was filed before October 1st. So had it been filed after that date, it would be subject to the new zoning. Because it was not filed after that date, it is not subject to the new zoning.
Thank you, Amy. That's helpful information. I will just add one question that one comment that I wanted to add that I missed in my comments, and that is when you come back to subcommittee, it'd be really helpful to understand your entry points to the building. I'm not sure that West First is really making sense given the public transit, but I would love to know what your thoughts are on entry points other than West First. And with that, commissioners, we need a motion.
I'll make a motion to send to subcommittee.
Second.
Great. I'm going to call on all commissioners. Laura Solano.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes.
Sorry, aye. I'm sorry.
Kathy Koderitis.
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Aye.
David Manfredi.
Aye.
Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
David Hassim.
Aye.
Bill Ron.
Aye.
Catherine Morris.
Aye.
Linda Easley.
Aye.
And myself, Mimi, yes. So we will see you at subcommittee. We have commissioners, thanks for your patience. We have one more exciting piece on our agenda, and that is to get a presentation on the Office to Resi conversion program.
This is.
John, are you with us? John Whale. Lizzie, we need to promote him to co-host.
There we go. Perfect.
Oh,
Good evening. Good evening, commissioners. I'm John Weil. I'm Senior Program Manager for Downtown Conversions here at the Planning Department. So I run our Office to Residential Conversion program. And so I just wanted to spend a few moments this evening walking through the program so that you're more familiar with it and so that you can feel free to ask me some questions at the end. So Christine, if we could, or Lizzie, if we could have next slide, please. So office to residential conversion is something that, while not as, how should I put it, native to Boston as maybe to Manhattan or cities like London. It's something that actually originated back on our radar in 2020 when Plan Downtown was kicked off. HRNA quickly identified office residential conversion as something that would be, how should I put it, potentially very fortuitous for Boston in revitalizing the downtown area. Fast forward to 2023, post-pandemic, HRNA did a feasibility study that looked at sort of the level of, how should I put it, support that the city of Boston would be able to offer this. And they quickly identified the fact that a tax abatement would be potentially the best tool and also the most effective tool for us to use. The program was launched in earnest in October of 2023. And as we fast forward to where we are today in 2025, it's something where we stand with 14 applications to convert 18 buildings. And so this exceeds the original goals that Mayor Wu had set out, which were around, we're at probably 690 units of housing being created today. Originally, she was hoping to get 200 to 300 units. So definitely a good start in the first year. Next slide, please. By way of context, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, nationally, we're seeing higher vacancy in commercial buildings. And we're also seeing that many office tenants, when their leases are coming due, are looking to reduce their footprint somewhere in the neighborhood of 50%. Sort of layered on top of this is the fact that interest rates have risen substantially from when many of these projects were originally financed, and that if banks are willing to lend again to the office space, it's now at a level that it sometimes is very prohibitive for them to continue to be functioning office properties. You may know that in other cities around the country, whether Chicago, Pittsburgh, New York, San Francisco, even Calgary up to the north, they have similar programs to what we have in Boston today. Next slide, please. But closer to home, just to give you a flavor of Boston, we're seeing similar headwinds here where we've got vacancy, especially in Class B and Class C in particular, at around 28%. And we're also seeing that as there's this move to bring folks back into the office, there really is a flight to quality going on where employers are looking to and gravitating towards Class A space with higher amenities, shiny glass buildings in order to woo people back off their couches and back into the office. And that's further putting pressure onto Class B and Class C. So next slide, please. And Mayor Wu's office residential conversion program, from our perspective, really is something that is a tool that can be used and really a proof of concept that office to residential conversion can happen in Boston. It really, from my perspective, is a win-win because it's something where we're responding to the changing streetscape and work environment post-pandemic. We're looking to create much needed housing downtown and actually at this point across all of Boston. And we're also looking to bring more vibrancy to the urban core. And finally, I think one thing that a lot of people don't really, touch on is that, in truth, the greenest building is one that already exists. And when you look at the total embodied carbon and the fact that we can basically reuse existing structures rather than raising them and putting new structures in their place, it has a great, impact in terms of sustainability. And really the program is, as you expect, it's taking these older, underutilized office buildings that in many cases are dark buildings and creating new multifamily residential rental units and bringing vibrancy and light back into neighborhoods. So next slide, please. And at its heart, as I mentioned, it's a tax abatement. So it's a 75% tax abatement being offered for 29 years. And that is the level that HRNA identified and thought would be the most meaningful for what the city of Boston can do. And similarly, though, what we've also paired with this is a streamlined Article 80 and permitting process, which allows us to basically save time and money for the proponents and get these buildings, which primarily are interior renovations, to market faster so we have housing brought online faster. And we've also helped to apply city resources to this project. And so hiring myself, I came on board the BPDA a little over a year ago with my background as commercial real estate development. And then folks like Michael Sinatra, who is the ombudsperson and helps with getting things through the permitting process as well. Now, we do have requirements that are being made of the developers coming through this program. First and foremost is that we're asking them to comply with the new inclusionary zoning policy. And so that, for large project is 17% at 60% AMI, plus another 3% for Section 8 voucher holders. we're also asking them to comply with stretch code for green energy. And I'll just pause here for a moment to say that along the lines of stretch code, that is sort of an evolving standard, as many of you know, with it originally being rolled out at the state level to deal with, new ground up construction. And we've recently been going through a comment period where the planning department's been very active giving feedback on how that can be more intelligently applied to adaptive reuse. And so certain things, whether it's, existing masonry facades or existing fenestration, looking to be able to get waivers around those to preserve them so that we're able to preserve the historic character of these buildings and not have to be forced to modernize in a way that may be inconsistent with the architectural sort of period and original intent. And finally, what I really want to touch upon here is the fact that this program is for adaptive reuse only. And so what we're asking is that we're not supportive and not offering a tax abatement for facadectomies or for raising a building and doing new ground up construction. This really has the preservation angle where we can look at some of these beautiful buildings that are looking for new life and new purpose and helping them to achieve that by converting to residential. We are open to the concept of physical extension, as many of you may know, but what we ask is that that be done in a way where the existing structure can bear the weight of what's being proposed. So if you get something which is a more robust manufacturing style building, a 6-story building, such as 95 Berkeley Street, you may be able to put as many as 3 or 4 additional floors on top just based on the robustness of the original engineering. But what we're trying to stay away from, once again, is, basically putting new foundations in by bringing steel down through a building and in essence creating a new structure that is completely independent sitting on top. So next slide, please. And like I said at the start, we really are quite pleased with the progress to date. And it's, as I sort of call it, meaningful but modest, where we've received 14 applications to convert 18 buildings. In some cases, there'll be multiple buildings that are joined on the interior, such as 85 Devonshire Street, which is linked up Water Street to 262 Washington and 258 Washington. In total, this is going to create 690 new units of housing. And we're talking about taking about 620,000 square feet of older office space off the market. Now, just by way of context, because this may be helpful, my numbers are that in Boston, we've got about 17 million square feet of Class B and about 11 million square feet of Class C. So 28 million in total. We're looking at, as I mentioned, about a 28% vacancy rate. So that's about 7.8 million square feet of space. With our 620,000 square feet, we're now getting, I think it's about 7%, almost 8% of the vacant space off the market so far in the first year. So I think we're pretty proud of the progress that we're making so far. And in real human terms, that is, 1,400 new people living downtown in Boston. And so I think our really hope back to the original aim of trying to address the challenged office market, but also bring new vibrancy downtown and create new units of housing. I think that we're making a good start. Next slide, please. I want just to spend a moment here, and apologies if I'm taking too much time this evening, but just given all of your backgrounds on the commission, I wanted to sort of walk through a little bit, you can just have up here on the screen for you to peruse what we've seen in terms of our 14 applications. The majority of them are downtown. We're also getting a few in the South End, such as 615 Albany Street and 95 Berkeley Street, which I referenced, as well as we're also starting to see some into Fort Point at 263 Summer Street with the iconic Boston Wharf Company sign on the roof. And so we're seeing a nice progression away from the original intent was just to focus on downtown. And as we've realized the program and it's grown, we're basically doing away with sort of the original look at those neighborhoods and basically saying that we're open to all comers around Boston, that if you have an older, underutilized office building, we're glad to hear from you and we're glad to welcome you into the program if your project is feasible and makes sense. And so next slide, please. The one thing which I will say, and just pause for a moment, is that although we are offering a tax abatement, and this is really putting the best foot forward for the city of Boston, it in many cases is not enough to make these, viable projects financially. That the margins are very thin on this type of adaptive reuse, and it's very challenging, especially with the higher interest rates and higher construction costs, to get these projects to pencil out. So we've tried to be very active in engaging with the White House, the federal level, as well as with Maura Healey and the State House, trying to get additional resources that can be put towards these. Because really it is difficult to get a lot of them to make sense. And what we don't want is to have these buildings sitting vacant when they actually would be great candidates to convert. So we've been able to work with the housing bond bill and have been able to get a tax credit put in there, which would be potentially 10% of total development costs. And we're exploring ways to do some low-cost federal loans to help these become reality as well. And so next slide, please. And so I just wanted for a moment just to touch upon what we're doing in terms of, expedited Article 80, which is really, as I like to say, we are streamlined but not steamrolled. We are really looking to basically take what normally is more of a sequential process and turn it into more of a parallel process whereby we upfront sit down the proponent with all of the key permitting agencies in order to get real-time feedback from ISD, from fire, from Mayor's Office of Housing, very importantly from landmarks, as well as disabilities, as well as our own urban design, Boston Groundwater Trust, just so that we can tease out up front what are the key challenges that need to be met in moving these from the office to the residential space. And like I said, many of the projects are really interior renovations. And so there is oftentimes very little exterior component to these. And so the permitting path in a lot of the cases can be quite straightforward to address. Next slide, please. But finally, what I do want to talk to you about a little bit is just to pause for a moment because, we are starting to see more complex projects come in, and some of these are involving physical extension. And so I'm imagining that in the coming months, there's the potential that projects will come in front of BCDC and where there is physical extension and that therefore, and we are cresting above the 100,000 square foot range. And so that this may become something where we find ourselves in front of you, myself introducing with the proponent a project and getting your feedback, which I think would be, a very exciting development if we're able to hit that level of scale and that level of project that we then bring them before you. So I really, I want to say that these aren't easy to get done and they're by no means a slam dunk, but I think they really are a win-win for the city of Boston. So I really appreciate your time this evening being able to introduce the program and also look forward to your support in the future as we bring project in front of you. But I want to pause now and really just open it up for questions in case that was a lot of me talking and a lot of information, but hopefully you found that useful.
John, I don't necessarily have a question. I think this was an excellent presentation, and I think it is a, really admirable, process that you're going through. And I really like the ambition of more living in downtown and bringing that vitality to the core of the city. I think the next follow-up planning challenges might make ensuring that it's a livable city where people have access to services, to grocery stores, to cleaners. I'm sure you don't want people living in the core only to have cars and to use them to go and do all of the basic necessities of life. So I just think that's the next thing to start for the city to start to planning. Like, how do we make this, walkable cities with all of the services that these residents will need? But otherwise, I think it's a really great program.
That is a great point. And one of the things which I neglected to say is that one of our requirements is that we're asking developers to maintain their ground floor retail just because we want to make sure that restaurants, corner shops, you name it, continue to exist. And so that those opportunities for, truly vibrant streetscape and truly vibrant life continue. But absolutely, I mean, I think my hope is that as we get more concentration of buildings downtown, it will attract more businesses and more shops and more supermarkets.
That's great. Kathy?
Yeah. Hi, John. I'm wondering if you're seeing any silver bullets in terms of what attracts a small scale or mid-sized developer to take on a project such as you're describing. You're obviously bringing some incentives in the expediting of permits and all of that, but I'm just curious if now that you've had a few through, if you're seeing any signs of what works in order to pick up your pace and get to greater scale.
Well, I think two things. One is I think that it remains a collection of unicorns as opposed to a product type at this point. And so I think there really is having developers or business owners that happen to have a property where it has all sort of the key elements, where it has, you know, 2 staircases, it has hopefully a relatively new elevator, all these things that really help mitigate the cost. And so I think we're seeing some repeat developers who are coming through where they're out there purposely acquiring buildings to convert. And I think that they're developing a good sort of knowledge base that helps them go from their first to their second project and then on in one case to a third. And so, but also I'm building my institutional knowledge. I mean, I love office to residential conversion, but I'm becoming even more versed in this and being able to help sort of shepherd projects, advise people and guide them through. So I think it's just there's a learning curve and we're moving up it very rapidly.
Great.
Laura Solano.
I just love, John, thank you for the presentation. It was so clear. And I love the pioneering of this, and it's you know, bound to become a more and more problematic for every city having office vacancy. But I have a question for you. In the act of pioneering, sometimes the discovery of difficulties in converting the unicorns can be tricky. So I have 2 questions. One is, what kind of support after a project is approved does the city give? And 2, is there a deadline for building? In other words, instead of having somebody get into a project and then realize it's more than they thought, you know, what guarantees the city that these projects will be delivered?
So I'll start with your second question. So in giving the tax abatement, we have them sign what's called a 121B agreement, which is sort of a short form of the larger 121A tax agreements we use for giant projects in Boston. And that agreement allows us to have clawback features so that we hold developers to a pretty tight time frame, because we want to make sure that not only do these housing units get created and delivered, but we're also wanting to make sure that we don't end out with stalled out projects. So we come in with sort of they know from day one that the expectation is that they're going to have to move quickly in terms of pulling a building permit and then beginning construction, and that the tax abatement will only remain in place if they continue to show, you know, reasonable progress and deliver within a reasonable time frame. Because I think you're absolutely correct that we need to make sure that these are things that don't turn into dark construction sites and get stalled out halfway through. And I think that the other thing is, I think that I'm sure along the way we'll see a few developments where an additional partner gets brought in at a later stage just to help, because I think you will have on a case or two people who may have found that it turns out to be a little bit more than they originally contemplated. But thankfully, there are investors that want to play that type of role. I think in terms of support, both myself as well as other folks within the planning department are planning to help be available and shepherd these through all the way through to completion, just simply because I think we all realize that these are not easy to complete and that there may be challenges that arise along the way. Because as many of you know, with adaptive reuse, until you actually get in and start doing the construction, there can be challenges that you didn't anticipate when you initially took it on. So I think it will be a very hands-on project, both for myself and for others.
Thank you.
David Hassin.
Yes, John, thank you. That was a great presentation and really helpful. To a comment and a comment and sort of a question. The comment was, I'm really glad to hear that you're looking at forms of mitigation in terms of the requirements, the energy requirements and so forth. That I've been involved in one of these and it fell apart on that issue, right? And so it was. So I'm really glad to hear that you're doing that. So please keep doing that, and actually, it's important for people. You know, the problem is when you have one of those experiences and then person becomes gun shy because they don't know that the ideas are evolving around that. So it's really important to hear that and to get that information out. And then the second thing I would say is that, you know, there are obviously these unicorn buildings that you have to match make. And I do hope that as time goes by, you'll have the opportunity to reach out to some of the larger landlords that exist in the city that own many of these buildings and may be under less financial pressure to make those conversions because of the breadth of their overall portfolio, and work with them to potentially pair them up like you a matchmaker,
Yeah.
potentially pair them up with people who are, or encourage them to get these buildings back into the sort of active life of the city, because they're the people who, they're the landlords who are really struggling with vacancy
Yeah.
on some of those buildings, and there are other landlords that have had those buildings vacant for many, many years. So
I think that's an excellent point.